Good evening. Call the December 13th Board of Selectmen meeting to order. I don't believe that there are any changes to the agenda this evening. We'll move to announcements. It is Rugged Road instead of Rugger. There is a typo on number 2 under announcements.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This meeting is being audio and video recorded, and I am told that someone might be taking some photos as well, so just FYI. We have our weekly update from the sewer director about the Nantucket Harbor Shimo and Plus Area Sewer Extension Project.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. We got another busy week. The crews are moving along nicely over in the Wamisquid area. They actually made the turn onto Meadowview today. The crew on Green Meadow is complete. The crew on Vesper McLean are complete. They have mobilized over to Rugged Road, one of the crews. C Street project's going very nicely. I don't know, I think I sent some pictures to Libby the other day to show some of the work going on down there and some of the demo work, so it's moving along very nicely. The camera crews, as you've probably seen them here and there, they're still skipping around a lot just because of all the other construction going on. So the last few days they've been in the Hooper Farm Road area and Newtown Road and everything, trying to get this section cameraed. Until we start on next week, we're going to be in the Orange Street area, the big corridor areas, so... and then we're going to be seeking some other different things going on, trying to just moving around, staying out of all the house moves and everything else. So it's we're staying ahead of everybody. So, but if anyone has any questions, all right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, David. The Children's Beach Boat Ramp continues to be closed until January 15th. Town offices will be closed Monday, December 25th, and also Monday, January 1st, in observance of the holidays. There is no Board of Selectmen meeting Wednesday, December 27th. And I have an additional announcement here. This Saturday, December 16th, from 1 to 3, stop by the Mid-Island Stop and Shop and help fill a truck. DPW, Fire, and Sewer and Water departments will each have a truck, and the idea is to put donated food items in the trucks, and they will then be delivered to the Nantucket Food Pantry. So that is this Saturday from 1 to 3 at the Mid-Island Stop and Shop. Thank you, Rob, for putting that together.
This is the public comment portion of our agenda. This is where someone can get up and bring something to our attention or make a comment, anything that is not otherwise on our agenda for discussion. Hearing none. Oh.
Good evening. Catherine Stover, 5 Liberty Street, but I'm speaking as town clerk. I missed the presentations by the Worcester Polytech people, and I'm really sorry I did, but I heard they did a fantastic job with the population study, and I feel a little bit vindicated because they said that our population is 18 to 24,000. So I've been saying this for a long time, and I think that we can't plan adequately unless we know how many people we're serving. So I'm really glad that they came up with that. Thanks.
And I'm really glad that you were right.
Do we have those on tape?
They were going to be taped, yes.
Okay, so they'll be available. Hearing no other public comments, I don't believe there's any new business. We'll move on to approval of minutes, warrants, and pending contracts. We have a couple of minutes.
Move approval of the minutes.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Approval of the payroll and treasury warrants.
Make that motion.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Approval of pending contracts. Are there any questions, comments on the contracts?
I just had a quick question. Just in layman's terms, what is it? Sum it up for me.
Sure, thank you. Actually, the engineer is present. We asked him to be here. It's a pretty substantial amendment to the contract. Kent Nichols from Weston and Sampson.
Good evening, folks. So, layman's terms, this has actually got, I think, four major components to it. The primary one of this is something we've been anticipating for a long time. And in fact, the last time that we came before you for contractual items, we talked about it, which is we're going to try to have the town participate in a way that will relieve the cost of the grinder pumps for the homeowners to some degree. And what that means is we're going to do a procurement package for that. So the vast majority of this amendment is actually to handle the procurement design and then helping out through the procurement process and actually through the supply period for that, which is a 2-year supply period for these. And in that way, we'll actually pre-buy the pumps. The town will then provide those pumps as agreed to by your board and through your decision making at a reduced price to the homeowners on the Shimmo and the Plus projects. So in addition to that, there's a small amount for an additional some additional public outreach work that we've done to date, and there's a little bit more in there for some extension of the public archaeology, what we call PALR sub, Public Archaeology Lab, for archaeological monitoring during construction. We had a very small amount in a prior amendment that we put in there, but we found that went by really quickly, and we've actually found some more sensitive areas out there. So that's still going to be a kind of a future thing to do there. So a couple of just a number of minor items that were kind of collected up in this thing, but the majority of it is related to the procurement for the grinder pumps. So.
Thank you.
Else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anything else for Kent while he's here? Because it was not easy to get over today.
I flew.
I need a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve that contract.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, citizen and departmental requests.
I don't know if anybody from the Land Bank is here, but they are requesting a letter of support from the board to the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs in support of their employee dormitory project in connection with the golf course. There's a letter in your packet.
Yes.
I make a motion to approve the letter.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
With
So
the
we'll
note
send
that
letter.
we're a really nice, helpful board trying to help another nice, helpful board.
Do you want that in motion?
It's in my comment.
Energy office.
Good evening to the board. Lauren Sinatra, Energy Coordinator. I regret that our consultant was unable to make it here tonight due to his ferry being canceled. I had hoped that he could have given more of an update on the wholesale energy market and rising capacity costs, which are now baked into higher electric rates, but I will try my best to summarize the memo that was included in your packets, which is similar to what we reviewed last week, which is wholesale energy markets are down. Our current contract for electricity for our municipal accounts, which are our small commercial through large industrial, is up at the end of 2018, but our consultants feel, just like our aggregation consultants, that we should act soon, test the market, and sign a contract if we do receive favorable prices. So to summarize the savings to date, which is illustrated in this chart, the town has saved nearly $38,000, and we expect by the end of the contract term, at the end of 2018, this will easily be above six figures. So the current contract price of 0.829 cents is doing very, very well against National Grid's basic service. So the ask before the board tonight is to authorize the town manager to execute a new supply contract if our consultants, with the input of the Energy Office, feels that we've received a favorable electricity supply price for our municipal facilities.
So I'd make that motion.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Can I
you
have
very much.
a quick question about this capacity prices? Who sets those?
I believe it's an auction price set by ISO New England. I don't know if any of you can answer that question in more detail, but yeah.
So it's an auction price? 'Cause
It's an
there's-
auction, and the prices have been set for the next 3 years, so we can more or less assume what certain prices will be.
But it seems that they've gone up substantially.
Yes.
And it's sort of interesting. National Grid isn't getting it one way now. It seems like they're getting it another way. Is that Is that a layman's way to look at it?
I'm not sure if it's fair to attribute that to National Grid, although there's other things we could fault them for, but you will see basic service prices going up as well
Right.
because of this. Thank you.
Okay, and next we have Vineyard Power.
So Tobias Glidden, 24 Rugged Road, and I'm here, as a member of Vineyard Power. Been their community liaison since October. Trying to support this offshore wind project that's happening south of Nantucket. So, since you guys last heard, since Richard was last here, there's been a number of things that kind of have evolved with this project, and we just wanted to take the time to kind of update you on it, and we appreciate you putting this item on the agenda tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.
I should also mention Eric Stevens is here from Vineyard Wind, and he is the project developer where Richard and I work for Vineyard Power, which is the nonprofit that promotes community benefits for these developed projects.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me back. Over the last few times I've been here, I've kind of gone through the whole process that has been going on since about 2009. And remember, there was the federal process, and that was all about where should offshore wind farms be developed. Federal water starts 3 miles from the shore. So one of the biggest issues for the first 5 years was kind of moving those wind farms further out to sea to minimize visual impacts and to also reduce conflicts with fishing and other recreational uses of the ocean. So the federal government determined that there would be 14 miles from shore. They then split that lease area into 5 lease zones. And then in around 2015, between 2013 and 2015, they held auctions, and 3 of those zones, you can see up there, 3 of those zones were then acquired, and there are 2 remaining. And the 2 that are remaining are furthest to the east, in other words, almost directly south of Nantucket. I also mentioned last time I was here, the federal government has kind of announced that they're going to be looking to hold auctions for those 2 unleased areas probably within the next year. So you'll go from 3 developers to most likely 5 developers that would hold leases on that. And then I also mentioned the other part of the process, which was the state process, because electrical markets and long-term power purchase agreements are effectively run through the state and their regulation over the regulated utilities, National Grid in your case, but Eversource in the case of the Vineyard. And National Grid and Eversource across the Commonwealth make up like 90% of all the customers. And last August, so it's about 15 months ago, Governor Baker signed that milestone piece of legislation, which requires those utility companies to buy offshore wind. And the amount is going to be about 15% of the state's demand or load, or about 1 million homes. Over a 10-year period from 2017 to 2027. As part of that, the first RFP was issued in June. So they were required to issue an RFP. And Eric Stevens, Vineyard Wind especially, been diligently working to get that RFP. And that RFP is due a week from tonight, so next Wednesday. So it's all coming together. The state will then have about 4 months to decide pick a winner or winners, and then within 2 years they'll go through the same process again, and they'll do that until that 1,600 megawatts or 15% of the state's demand is taken up. So those are the 2 processes. I think I mentioned to you as Vineyard Power, when we started in 2009, our whole kind of parochial focus was to try to get benefits to Martha's Vineyard. That evolved over the last couple of years, primarily through meeting Lauren and working with her both at the federal level, but also in various groups around, whether it's the Island Institute up in Maine or just coming out here, and it's been really great to work with her. What we were primarily drawn to is what kind of community benefits can we find for Nantucket. I think I might have mentioned to you, we had focused on Martha's Vineyard about getting an operations and maintenance facility. That was something we were looking at there. And the item that quickly rose to the top on Nantucket was to try to avoid the need for a third cable. When we spoke, that was a significant possible expense for ratepayers on Nantucket, and the number that National Grid confirmed to us in our last discussion was it was $125 million. So it's quite a big number. So We spent a lot of money on this. We were going through this today. We probably spent over $100,000 exploring the option of bringing the bringing our project cable onto Nantucket. I see there's people in the audience we've met with, DPW, Surfside Wastewater Treatment, the Water Department, just various stakeholders that we spoke to about, the possibility of doing this cable. And remember, that would have been like landing on Nantucket and coming across and then going off. That was always going to be more expensive for the project company. Our estimates were, it wasn't insignificant. Our estimates were, in the orders of magnitude of like $30 to $40 million more expensive. But still, that would have allowed the island to save maybe $85 million, or the total 125. So we were pursuing that, and about a month ago, we took that to National Grid. We had a joint call with National Grid with Lauren and Vineyard Wind, and we proposed this, and it went up the chain in National Grid. And when it came back down, in that intermittent period, National Grid announced another program for Nantucket, which was the battery coming and the new generator that's coming, the 10 megawatt generator. And as a result of that, they said the need for a third cable was pushed way, way into the distance. And if I said something like up to past 2040, would that be something that was accurate? It was around then, but it was a long time. It wasn't something that the town was going to be faced with within the next 10 years. So that whole community benefit that we were trying to capture kind of went away. And in those discussions around that, we were kind of asking Lauren, what other things could we do for the island? And one of them was to increase the island's resiliency for electrical supply. And from that, we came up with a concept, which is in your handout, which is something we're going to be implementing across Martha's Vineyard, also Nantucket, and there'll be some other towns participating in it. What it is going to be a fund that's going to develop solar with storage attached to it, preferably at critical services, whether it's emergency services on the island. It could be the water company. It could be, it should be determined by the town. It wouldn't, so there's going to be an advisory committee that's advising the fund so that Nantucket would have a representative. And we would really be steered by that. But in the case of Martha's Vineyard, we just nominated Oak Bluffs, one of our public schools, as the shelter in case of power outages and severe storms. So we're going to be looking to do some solar and storage there. So if the power goes out, they'll have resiliency and continued storage, but that's to be defined later. The fund is going to be a multi-million-dollar fund. It's going to be contributions made to that fund every year for 15 years. So it's a long-term process. And as I say, it's going to be significant. So it won't just be one project. It'll be projects that will be developed over this time period. So that's what we came up with as far as maybe something that the town of Nantucket would benefit from. So with that, I'm actually happy to take questions. We're also here asking for a letter of support because on December 20th, when we put in our bid, it would be really great to have the town support. And whether this supports, and the support is not about offshore wind, it's about our project and the outreach we've done to the town of Nantucket. I think you might have had 2 letters submitted, but we spoke with Lauren today. There's a shorter version, I think, that Lauren submitted, and that's the letter we'd be asking you to support. If I'm correct, if you have the 2 copies of the letter. So
We do.
yeah, so it would be the shorter version that Lauren helped draft. So I'll pause for questions.
Are there questions? I was very pleased with Lauren's draft of the letter.
I have a question.
Yes, Matt.
The Resiliency Fund. So you guys are giving is for the vineyard. You're gonna give it to the vineyard. Is that how?
No, it's going to be the fund is going to be, I would say, primarily used between Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. Okay. But it also says maybe there'll be projects in Yarmouth or Barnstable as well where our cable is going to go through. So.
Gotcha. So where your cable is landing, kind of.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I mentioned the last time our project is going to interconnect into the Cape.
Right.
And that was the whole idea. Instead of, that's why we're going to come through Nantucket.
Right. Now, with the numbers that you had, and it doesn't make sense to connect to Nantucket now,
Yes.
Is there any chance it's going to make sense for either the 2 unleased portions? Since they're a little further away, would they?
I think the answer we got from National Grid is it's not going to be necessary to have that because you're going to not need the third cable for a generation or so, if that.
Right.
And the likelihood is battery, anyway, that's unknown, Matt, to be honest with you. But
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of getting to is, and maybe Lauren can answer it, but is it really something we shouldn't be worrying about, or should we be sort of advocating for ourselves to still have one of these other guys come through the island?
I think it makes sense for us to try to negotiate for community benefits with the bidders for the 2 unleased parcels, but not for an undersea cable. I think that's soon going to become an obsolete form of contingency support for either backup power to reduce peak load, and any cost to bring that to the island, National Grid made clear, will be on local ratepayers, and that's something we're trying to avoid. So if we promote energy storage, energy efficiency, demand response, I think that's the way to keep costs low for Nantucket ratepayers.
And Lauren, while you're there, what do you think about the idea of having stored solar power on island for emergency situations?
I think it makes perfect sense, and I proposed that idea at a recent resiliency mitigation meeting. I think solar plus storage is a clean energy resiliency solution that should be pursued at critical facilities, for example.
So we would probably be thinking about the high school since that's our emergency shelter.
I would say yes.
And maybe with enough of these solar storage projects, the need to even turn the diesel generator on might go away,
Yep, exactly.
I just have a question about what is Vineyard Power? Did they form organically from Vineyard Wind, or is there a direct connection?
It's a good. So Vineyard Power is the nonprofit cooperative. We were formed in 2009 to make sure that we had a say in how offshore wind was developed. Mm-hmm. In other words, that it wasn't developed 3 miles from the shore. So we had a say in that. And we also really advocated for developers we advocated at the federal level for developers that partner with communities get some benefit. So we're separate from Vineyard Wind. Mm-hmm. Our job is to make sure that Martha's Vineyard gets community benefit. That's evolved to now Nantucket through our relationship. And as you know, I got to meet Tobias during his state campaign. And that's why we asked him to help us. So the whole thing for us is to make sure we deliver community benefit here. And the great thing about it is we got a partner who recognizes it. I think we're the only developer that's really kind of going out of our way to make sure communities can benefit from offshore wind.
So despite the fact that the cable isn't coming through Nantucket, you would still consider us a host community, and you'd be looking at benefits, the community benefits for the island?
Not a host community as such, but a community that's going to be impact. Mm-hmm. You're neighbors to the project. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the way we would look at it. And maybe another way to say it, there's no requirement to do what we're doing. It's
I suppose that's what I'm.
I think that's what you're getting. So
I think it's very generous. I'm just trying to understand if there's other reasons, or if it's a long-standing commitment, or if it's a commitment that's directly related to some sort of on-island facilitation of Vineyard Wind or Vineyard Power. But it's not. What you're saying is
right, it's not.
Generosity, essentially, or seeing that we're impacted potentially visually.
Yeah. And kind of consistent with our philosophy of delivering local benefits. Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit torn only because I appreciate the work that you've done, and I appreciate the work that Tobias and Lauren have both done. I feel a little underprepared to fully support it, only because we don't have. I feel like I don't really know quite yet exactly what we're signing up for without the photo simulations.
Yeah.
But I'm also okay with Lauren's revised letter.
Yeah. That's why I'm comfortable with Lauren's letter, mm-hmm. because it recognizes the information that we don't have and that we will have to understand those impacts.
Was that a motion?
That's a motion to approve or to accept Lauren's revised letter of support.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you for taking the bumpy
You're
flight.
welcome. And I'll be back in the new year to do it again, to update.
And we'll authorize Dawn to sign it? Is that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, next up, we have a request from the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy for a non-binding ballot question for this annual election. Did anyone want to speak to this?
I have some notes, so I'm not too scatterbrained. My name is Burton Balkind. I'm a member of the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy, and you might have heard the term long time, first time. I watched you on TV, the Board of Selectmen, and listened for years, but I never spoke before. Reason why I'm speaking is because as a member of the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy, I'm concerned about protecting and preserving Nantucket's town-owned beaches, because of the island-wide coastal erosion that we've seen as a real threat in many ways to the island, and also that the town is working on a resiliency plan and a strategic plan. And we felt like that this is a good time to propose a non-binding ballot question for the 2018 town meeting. And this would help gauge the level of public support for these plans, and also get an understanding how the citizens feel about our protecting and preserving our town-owned beaches. Also, the result of this non-binding ballot question could be a platform for education for the town and for the Board of Selectmen, and we can see the different ways that we can preserve and protect our town-owned beaches. So that's what I have.
Thank you.
Hey, my name is Troy Heiser. I'm also with the Coastal Conservancy. Another reason we'd like to see this question be brought up at the next town meeting is so that the results of it could be used as quantifiable data for the Coastal Resiliency Plan, as well as other relevant projects coming up in the future. A study done by a former local student has shown that up to 71% of our residents believe that this is a current issue that we need to be ready to deal with. And I think this is a great way to show that they really have a voice and really care about the issue, and that the town respects that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Deanna Atherton. I decided to wear my pink sweater because Jason has his pink sweater on too.
I knew somebody was going to bring it up.
Just as a point of clarification, is a non-binding ballot question is on the ballot at annual town election, which is in April, the week following annual town meeting. It gets a little confusing, but what we're asking you is to consider agreeing to, well, we're really asking you for two things. One, we want to get your feedback for the concept of having this kind of ballot question. Quite frankly, we spent some time considering exactly what to do, whether to come in with some citizens articles or a ballot question. And we thought, since as a town and as a board, you're just beginning to develop a coastal resiliency plan and you're continuing on with your strategic plan, that it might be really beneficial to start with a very broad-based question that would really, in some ways, affirm what we think is a core value of the community, and that is to preserve and protect our town-owned beaches. So this is a work in progress. We're not wedded to this language. That's why we wanted to share it with you and get it in the packet and get you thinking about it. We as a team have discussed, should it be town-owned beaches? Should it be other beaches? Should it be coastal beaches or pond beaches? So this is really what we think is sort of gets at the intent and would really give, as Troy said, the citizens a voice that will enable them to speak out and will give you some quantifiable feedback from the citizenry about how important this is as a priority in going forward. So we would welcome any comments that you have or any suggestions, sort of what's your reaction?
Go ahead.
I just, I really applaud you for bringing this forward. I've been thinking about how we might begin more of a community conversation about coastal resiliency, and I think I like the linking of the protecting our beaches to that concept. And I think this could be this ballot question will help provide feedback and input into the coastal resiliency plan. And I think the more people that are aware of it and the need for this, the plan, I think we'll get more input and people will be serious about it. And I think this is a way to attack that.
Good. Thank you, Jim. This approach is interesting because a number of us, along with the Natural Resources Coordinator, were at the Cape Coastal Conference last week. And one of the presenters from the Cape Cod Commission said a place for a community to start is to have a conversation about how much the community as a whole values its coastal resources. So that was just an affirmation for us that maybe this was a place to begin.
Yeah, I'm sort of, I don't think there's any question that the town, values its coastal resources. I think the devil is in the details. I think we voted this in 1995, something very similar with a little more details about easements, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think we're going to learn anything that we don't know if we ask this question. And I think there's a big caveat in here about taking whatever actions necessary. Well, I think how do you determine whatever is necessary? And I think that's sort of deciding that or figuring that out. Look, maybe what we do at the airport or at the sewer beds might be different than what we do somewhere else. And so I think we have to get to that level of discussion, not necessarily a feel-good vote for we want our beaches. Because as we all know, our beaches are under attack in some manner, or are endangered in some manner. But I think some of the solutions may make it worse. So I think somehow whatever we do has to get a little further than just we like our beaches. And I don't say that. I'm not saying that flippantly. I'm just saying I'd like to see. I don't know what that question would be or how we do it. But again, the devil is in the details.
Well, we've thought about that, Matt, too, and we're really looking to you and our town officials who are the experts about the how. How would we protect our town-owned beaches? What are the mechanisms that we could activate? And that's something we're learning in terms of easements or zoning overlay protection districts. Maybe, even conveying them to an entity like the land bank that would protect them in perpetuity. I mean, it seems to us as we become more educated, what's ahead are a lot of uncertainties. But one certainty in the uncertainties is that the town may well come under pressure in terms of making choices, and some of those choices could be harmful to our beaches, to our public beaches. And that's why those of us who have been involved in planning know if you start out reaffirming a core value, that's a good place to begin. I think citizens are concerned when they go around the shoreline and see what's happening to the beaches, and I think this does give them an opportunity to speak out.
I think that you will get a pretty overwhelming response that people on this island, it's important to them to protect our beaches. I think that that's a very high percentage of why most of us call Nantucket home. I'm trying to get a little bit more into where Matt's coming from. I would definitely strike the word whatever from it and just have it read taking actions necessary to preserve, because I think that there's a piece that I'd like to get at where, like the sewer beds, like the airport, at what point where might some type of very critical infrastructure outweigh possibly having that little stretch of beach, because I know what we're getting at is measures to control erosion, which generally includes some kind of armoring, and that regretfully makes sand wash away. But there may be certain scenarios
I think
where
that's a good suggestion, Dawn.
there's a mechanism to weigh critical public infrastructure with use of that piece of beach.
So, part of making I don't know, they call this a mission statement or whatever, but, there is sometimes a benefit to being a little provocative, especially if you're trying to win the minds and hearts of folks. So I'm very comfortable. I mean, I think we should do whatever it takes, and it's okay that it's not well defined, and we don't know if it'll have an impact on this or that. But if that's what we go in as a core value, I mean, obviously we're going to have to make compromises. There's only if it's a fiscal issue, we only have so much money. But if we go into it saying, we'll do whatever it takes, that's different than we'll see what happens. I personally that would be more of a I'd be ready to follow that charge if somebody says we'll do whatever it takes. So, and it's non-binding. So,
I think a little bit as well that I think if you read it quickly, it reads as a happy let's save our beaches. But I think if you really look at the last line as open recreational space in perpetuity, I think if it's read appropriately and when you think about it, that's getting at, are we going to preserve the beach and preserve the coastline, or are we actually going to keep it as open recreational space? And that's, I think, the conversation that needs to be had at that island-wide level. And the only comment that I would have on it is I don't think it should be limited to town-owned coastal beaches. I really think beaches don't know property lines, and I think that whatever we do on town-owned land or don't do is going to impact neighbors, and same the other way. So I think for me, I think the conversation needs to be island-wide, and there's a little bit that feels that if it can be phrased that way, I think that's what's important is an island-wide discussion, that we really come up with an idea of how we're going to deal with erosion.
And does it extend to not necessarily town ownership of property, but town easement rights, one big beach easements, that kind of thing?
Exactly. And then also what happens on private beaches can affect town-owned beaches.
Exactly.
And we talked about that, for instance, at the Conservation Commission, when the commission is considering an erosion control installation that's contiguous to a public access, that there be a concern that the town's interest in maintaining that public access be asserted, because we know that with some erosion control installations, you get scouring around the edges, and wouldn't it be a shame at the end if, in approving this, we were negatively impacting a public access that we had spent a long time trying to obtain. So we'll have to think about that. Let me tell you, the second thing we're asking you is that, as we understand from the town clerk, and we're glad that she is here, is that you can vote, the board can vote to put such a non-binding ballot question on the ballot for annual town election in 2018. And it doesn't mean that you endorse it, it just means you agree to put it on the ballot. And otherwise, we could submit a petition, and it would require 10% of the registered voters, which would be about 800 signatures. We think we could get that. It would be time-consuming, and we'd rather spend our time and energy and resources in preparing sort of an education plan through the spring leading up to the election. So we're not asking you to do that tonight because we don't have the final wording. But if we could have some sense of that, as we understand the deadline would be January 20th. So with the holidays, if we could have some indication from you, if you might be willing to do this, then we could plan accordingly and, parcel out our time. So that was the other reason we wanted to bring it before you tonight.
I would rather agree on the wording and put it on for you rather than having you go get 800 signatures and then having the town clerk have to certify those 800 signatures.
You don't want to keep Catherine busy?
We have
she's
a large
busy enough.
team, many of whom are here, and we're ready to do it.
I think we can refine the wording.
But if we could, maybe after the holiday break, we could come back with some final wording, taking into consideration your comments tonight.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just want to, I like this whole idea to get the conversation started, something we need to be talking about more. But I think if you read this, everyone's going to say yes. If I want to hard armor the whole island, yes. If I want to let Mother Nature take its course, yes. It depends on how you read it. It's kind of what you were saying, Rita.
A little bit, but I think it's how you. I think if you want to hard armor the island, then you're not preserving them as open recreational space in perpetuity. But I think that it can, if you read it too quickly, I think you're going to think that it's, do we want to protect our beaches? Yes. So that's my only.
I think that's your interpretation.
I think Steve wanted to say something.
I think that's your interpretation of it. I think the guys in Nantucket are gonna look at this and say, yeah, we need to protect them, and the way we protect it is dumping tons of sand on here every day so that we can still have a bridge in our homestay.
But is that keeping it as open recreational space in perpetuity?
And hence the debate. I mean, that's the community conversation.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. So I think,
it's all good.
Yeah.
No, but it isn't good. I think in a way because I don't think because I think that's and this is where I'm trying to dig deeper. I think we have consensus, but I think again it's the details. I was instrumental in One Big Beach, and I look and it's sort of working, it's sort of not. I think what's missing in a way is we need a boss. Like no one owns it, so it's the responsibility of administration or the selectmen or you guys as a group. But who owns it? We need someone sort of like Lauren, who's in charge of our beaches. Who comes? No offense, Lauren, not giving you another job, but we need someone. But this stuff is too important to sort of come up and and feel good about it and then go away. And it's sort of who's going to stay on top of all the different aspects that are happening and make sure the easements go through. Like One Big Beach could help us all the way around the island, but we need to have a you need to have a big fundraising and a big party every year, and the people who do it should be have their names put in the front of the paper. Isn't this a great thing that we're doing? And the people who aren't doing it, we should sort of be shamed a little bit into doing it, because that's how we view our beaches and how we view our island. And I think that we don't have anyone doing that on a consistent basis. And so I just think, and this is great. I'll vote for it. We'll vote for it. But I think if we want to move this along, I think we need to dig a little deeper somehow.
I'm just, can I take?
Oh, yeah.
He's been waiting.
Sure. So Stephen Cohen, I think I'm an attorney. I represent the Wisconsin Beach Preservation Fund. I suspect that when Deanne said pressure will be brought upon you, that she meant me. They say that in politics that a gaffe is when you accidentally say the truth. So I'll apologize in advance, but this is a Trojan horse. Okay, and what I mean by that is that it is widely crafted to look like it should get 100% of the vote, and it's proposed as non-binding, and it's to protect our beaches, and it's for public recreation. And I think everybody in here knows that 100% of the people, including me, would vote for that because it sounds great. But the reality is this is going to be used as it's currently crafted to then say, look, 100% of Nantucketers actually took X position, and so now you, Town of Nantucket, or you, SBPF, or you, Airport, or you, Nantucket homeowners, can't do that because 100% of the voters on Nantucket already had their voice on this and said we need to protect open space, public recreational use in perpetuity. It would be really great for the town to engage on the issue of resiliency, on erosion management, on protecting public access to the water, all kinds of things. And a ballot question is a terrible way to do it because there's actually no public debate in a ballot question. It's not a public forum. It's not a town meeting discussion. It's not anything. It's a few words on a piece of paper that people come and check a box that they don't even necessarily understand what they're voting on. So if we want to engage in a community conversation about it, I highly think that that's a great idea. I think we strongly agree that this is an important issue, and that preserving public access to the beaches, especially town-owned beaches, is an important issue. But this steps on the toes of the role of the Board of Selectmen, the role of the Conservation Commission, and doesn't take into account any of the needs of the community, any of the private property rights, any of the public infrastructure, any of the private infrastructure. This is not a good idea as currently crafted. This is a Trojan horse as currently crafted, although it could be changed to be something else as a great way to get the conversation started. I do not think that it is a coincidence that SBPF is, as publicly acknowledged, is going to be starting its permitting in January for going back to Baxter Road, and this is coming out just ahead of that. Not a coincidence in my estimation. So, I really hope we're not looking at more battles about this stuff. I hope we're looking at cooperative efforts. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for the community to engage in a positive way here, but not as currently crafted. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maureen Phillips. I live at 30 Long Pond in Nantucket. And as Matt mentioned, obviously we in Nantucket have a very strong wish to have this dealt with on a planned and thoughtful basis. And I disagree strongly with Mr. Cohen's portrayal of this non-binding advisory question as a Trojan horse that's somehow going to limit what the Board of Selectmen or the town can do. Non-binding is non-binding. It doesn't mean sneakily binding or underhanded binding or, I'll move the things around so you kind of won't see what's happening. This needs to start a conversation. Mr. Cohen did agree with that. And this is what we want to do, as Deanne said. And I just want to underscore the fact that this is intended to start a conversation and in no way is intended to limit anything. In fact, we want, through this, we'll have a conversation, have more information, so you all can make better decisions for the whole island. And that's what we want. And so getting it on the table with something that's non-binding, we thought is really the best way to start it. So, thank you.
I think that it's, I think I agree with both you, Jim, and Matt, and I think that the conversation needs to be started or restarted. I wouldn't be overly suspicious of the timing because I think it has to do with town meeting and when ballot questions need to be in, as well as I think that the reason the SBPF project exists and the Coastal Conservancy project exists is because coastal erosion is a pressing issue. And I think that we do lack some guidance, and I think that step one to figuring out what comes next is, again, having some impetus for starting that conversation. And I think a ballot question, appropriately worded, can be a start. Is it the most effective be-all, end-all of the conversation? No, but I think it's a good start, and I'd be supportive of putting the ballot on with the revisions that the Coastal Conservancy comes up with.
Rita, would you want to take out that last sentence after necessary? Is that too broad?
Well, I think to Matt's point, I would like to be able to look at the response and be able to gauge what we're actually learning from it. I think there's some value to having a simple affirmation that people on the island do really care or want us to take the next steps or look at it, prioritize coastal resiliency, or prioritize this discussion about coastal erosion. I don't know that it needs to be taken out, but I think that, as many people have pointed out, if it's not clear, we have the answer that we're getting isn't clear. So I don't think it needs to be taken out. But I think Dawn's point about whatever actions, because I do think there will be some instances where we want to be able to have all options available for access roads for whatever might come up. So I'd be more interested in seeing that changed than the final line.
Is everyone comfortable with us considering the language a little bit further and bringing this back up January 3rd?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay.
We'd like to thank you. It's really appreciated by citizens who are concerned about an issue to ask to be on an agenda to have this kind of discussion. And we just want to tell you that we're most appreciative of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Is it fair to say we have a consensus that the board will put this on rather than asking them to go through?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
my
Good.
take.
Good.
That's what I
Yes.
thought you meant.
But we just need to refine the wording with advice from council. Town managers report.
Thank you. Okay, the first item under the town manager's report is our annual budget presentation. And this is our budget presentation for fiscal 19 for the general fund. I realize that shortly after starting some presentation like this, people's eyes start to glaze over very quickly. I've seen it a number of times, so I'm trying to
Not ours.
try to keep it.
Not ours.
This is the high
Except
point
for
of my
you.
life.
Except for
I mean,
you.
I love this stuff.
I know, you're the only one. So we tried to, we're trying to spice it up a little and just
I think
try
our
to
questions
hang in.
might spice it up a little.
Yours, well, yes. So our presentation tonight, the presentation itself is a PowerPoint. It's an overview of updated projections and our recommendations. Much of the detail of our recommendations is contained within a budget message. It's a separate document that we're not intending to go through in detail tonight. We can, if the board would like us to do that, or go through it at a later time. I want to make 6 main points that are going to be covered here, and then I'll just briefly outline them now. The charter, section 4.2D3, requires the town manager to prepare and submit to the board an annual operating budget, so just to set the stage of why this is coming up. Number 2, the budget development process. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of that. Preliminary review of revenue and expense projections was reviewed with the board in September. Subsequently, the fiscal 19 budget instructions were issued to all of the departments. The departments are generally instructed to prepare operating budgets that are level funded with the exception of small line item adjustments and expense increase requests. Expense increase requests are items generally between $2,500 and $50,000, which have been requested by the board or town administration, are documented new legal mandates, contractual or other required increases, could provide an immediate documented savings to the town, or is a program or service already underway and approved by the board or town administration. Expense increase requests may be new or additional personnel, one-time or recurring items, new or expanded programs. Our recommendations are based on some criteria that we've established. I can go through all of that if you wish, but I won't go through it all entirely right at the moment. I'm trying to get through without boring you. We have reviewed all the line items and all the EIRs with all of the departments over the months of October and November. The only area we have not yet covered is the county at this point. Third, our budget projections for fiscal 19, after taking into account our roll forward numbers and fixed costs for town and the school, leaves approximately between $800 and $1 million for town use, depending on how we end up. We received town personnel-related requests totaling approximately $1.8 million, and operating expense increase requests totaling approximately $1.9 million. And Brian and I are going to go over this in a little more detail momentarily. Our general outlook for fiscal 19, this is my fourth point. is based on local indicators such as building permits, real estate sales, rooms and meals tax. These all appear generally pretty strong, but we are monitoring them for signs of leveling off, and we have Julia, our financial analyst, looking at all of these things carefully on a very regular basis. Nationally, there is some obvious uncertainty that we are watching carefully through news and economic reports and our own Muni Watch report that Julia developed. You've seen it a couple of times here, several times. And that report is meant to monitor and track a variety of economic indicators. We believe there's a need to be cautious with the fiscal 19 budget, yet we also recognize the value of expenditures that strengthen the town's current infrastructure, as well as certain staffing demands to meet the needs of our community and the goals of the board and the administration. Our objectives for fiscal 19 are to keep the operating budget within projected revenue. We do have a recommendation for additional funds for some specific purposes, address legal mandates and needs that we have seen expressed through the board or administrative operations, and to maintain some flexibility with the levy limit and the use of free cash. In other words, we're trying not to spend all of the projected revenue. We have a balanced budget recommendation that includes approximately $685,000 worth of personnel requests, $571,000 of expense requests, and a recommendation to alter funding for Our Island Home so that more general funds are available for town and school use. Just wanted to mention some future concerns, and this is in the presentation as well. Health insurance is always a concern, especially since the Cadillac tax is still looming out there, and if it comes to fruition. Infrastructure costs, maintaining public property, as we just heard a little bit about, potential climate change, sea level rise impacts to public property. We need to pay attention to that. Harbor Place is just something that, as we've discussed so far with it, I'm not saying that it's necessarily a serious concern so much as we need to pay attention to that going forward as well, since future expenses are unknown there for the town. Island home expenses are a concern. The NRTA, we do want to just continue to make the board aware that the impact of the year-round shuttle service on the general fund is something that we need to pay attention to as well. It won't hit the cherry sheet until 2021, and we need to be sure that we have a way to fund that, because when it hits the cherry sheet, there will be an impact to the budget. Okay, so that's my general intro. Brian's going to give an overview of the financial projections and details, as well as the funding sources, and then I'll go over the specific requests. And if the board has questions at any time, just feel free to ask.
Good evening. Thank you. So to start off, when we started this review after the presentation in September and working through up until now, we've determined that we would have approximately $94.8 million available to raise through all various revenue sources, including property tax, local estimated receipts, state aid, and some free cash funding. We've projected expenses and recommended expenses of $94.5 million, which would leave us approximately at this point $248,000 under the levy limit. It's important to note that this is consistent with last year, specifically in prior years. Last year, when we were here before you, we projected about having approximately $308,000 under the levy limit at this time. So this is consistency. It's also consistent with what we've represented when we've talked to either Standard & Poor's and Moody's, as well as leaving some flexibility to meet any unforeseen changes that may come between now and working with the FinCom in the budgetary process.
Hang on, before you go,
Yeah.
what is the contingency percentage that would be good? Like, what's the standard? Because that's like 1/3% or something.
We've typically kept that, and as we've moved through the process, it's gotten to maybe 1% or 2%, depending on of the levy capacity. Is a good thing. In some years we've had a little bit higher than that, based on everything that's happened, but we've consistently been in that starting point and moving forward. Slide 3 essentially shows you that we're presenting you the balanced budget and compares it to last year. It does show some decreases. Non-departmental is about $1.7 million decrease. As we go through the slides, I'll highlight this again, but the majority of that is related to some debt service that's falling off in fiscal 19, primarily related, to one large payment for some land bank land that was purchased. That debt was covered by the town. Slides 4 and 5 simply show this in a pie chart formation. Slide 4 shows you that, as we discuss every year, our primary source of revenue is property tax. Rooms and meals is 4%, and one of the larger ones after that. Expenditures, we break down between municipal, school, non-departmental, and special appropriations. Special appropriations consist of all the enterprise subsidies and as well as Health and Human Services, Reserve Fund, OPEB, and things of that nature. Slide 6, we break down kind of where our recommendations are going. The town operational expenses, we're recommending $7.6 million. Included in that $7.6 million is $571,000 of expense increase requests that the town manager briefly discussed. The $7.6 million is 0.1% decrease. That decrease, every year we have some expense increase requests that are considered one time, and Julia and myself and my staff go through and every year scrub those out for this next starting point because they're one time so that they don't roll over. One of the large ones that came out for fiscal 19 is in fiscal 18. We funded $200,000 for the town, the mandated revaluation of the town. So that's not an expense that we have to fund in 19. We're projecting $19.46 million in salaries on the municipal side, including $541,000 of personnel expense increase requests. On the school side, we've projecting $5.4 million worth of expenses. Included within that is $225,000 of new operational money for their operational expense side. On the salary side, $23.4 million, and included in that $23.4 is new personnel expense requests of $455,000. So moving on to health insurance, we're projecting a total of just around $12.2 million collectively between active and retirees. Represents a 3.3% decrease. This was a result of institution of sections 21 through 23 to make plan design changes. As we went through the budget process, I know that in September we had shown that there potentially could be a deficit. One thing I do want to note is in September, we didn't have a plan design done, so one of the big drivers was this plan design change. We went back through, made all the changes to get to where this should be, and then added for any new positions and a little bit of, in case anybody changes plans throughout the year. We also looked very extensively at general insurance, and we're able to reduce that by about $190,000 based on where the last 2 years of projections have come in and where our consultant feels that that's an acceptable decrease. Debt service is at just over $7 million. There is a couple small things that are not debt excluded. Primarily, all of our debt service in the general fund is debt excluded, and we do have some small. We have about $200,000 for any short-term interest on any bands that we take out. Retirement, we are still working with Barnstable County, and we've been continuing to project 8.5% increase. We hope that based on their analysis that it will actually come in slightly less than that. Within here, there's $8.2 million going to the general funds, which represent approximately 1.8% increase. Special appropriation line items, we've recommended a $50,000 increase to Health and Human Services. We know that there's been a lot of applications to them in prior years, so we felt that it was prudent to consider increasing their allocation to $450,000 this year from $400,000. County assessment, we don't believe will have to change. We're recommending Reserve Fund, OPEB at the same levels as they were in prior years, at both at $500,000 and unpaid bills at the same approximately $20,000 level. We've allocated or allowed for a small increase in cherry sheet charges the majority of our cherry sheet charge is related to the NRTA. And community school, we've recommended $450,000. Last year, we allocated $465,000, but the school said that they need a $450,000 allocation would be sufficient for them. We have recommended in 800. Yes.
Do you think that that's attributed to them moving back into the school?
It's
so they're not
yes.
paying
The
rent?
There was the $65,000 that we had part of that was allocation for the off-site locations that they had, and moving back would have eliminated that, but they did ask for that additional $50,000, so we did make that recommendation. The Affordable Housing Trust, we recommended $800,000. Last year it was $500,000, which is why that it's a 60% increase.
I just want to make a comment on that. So I think as I've been thinking about how our, kind of what's the policy behind this, and because we kind of every year come up with different numbers, and my recollection is we've said we want to spend as a community about $1 million in, for affordable housing. So I think, to me, that number may be a little high because I think the CPC's looking at about a $400,000 contribution or thereabouts is what I've heard. That may or may not be true. So I think there's some room there because I know there's, we've heard from Libby that there are some other things that the town would like to spend some money on that we didn't have. And so I would ask the board to consider as we go through this process to maybe think about reducing that down to 500. I'm sorry, 600. So that would make up a total of $1 million. So I just make that comment as a placeholder as the conversation goes forward.
And lastly, the town charter does require that we raise in taxation 1% of prior year real and personal property taxes collected, as well as local estimated receipts, and that works out, and that must be used for capital funding, and that works out to $898,000. So all told, that is.
So I'm just going to ask, when are you going to do the revenue reconciliation? Is that after the expenses?
No, I can tell you the majority of the change in revenue, the 94 does include about $1.1 million in free cash. So if you back that out, we would have been approximately just over $700,000 above what we had projected in September. The majority, as I had noted in September, that projection was based on having new growth certified at that point. That accounted for about $301,000 of the increase in the revenue that we had. There's about $200,000 in debt exclusion increases. We have increased new growth from the $700,000 we projected in September to $800,000 for this the budget recommendation we're making.
Could we just speak to that for a minute again? I'm trying to look for money for you to spend on some of these other things, and I'm looking at Appendix D, where you have budget 2018 $1,251,767. Now is that what for your terms budget FY 2018? Is that a projection or is that?
It is not, but when we did it in September, we didn't have all of that in. So
right.
When we calculated the levy limit, we didn't have the benefit at that time of what the actual new growth was going to be certified at. So when that additional money above that estimate was certified by the state, it automatically becomes part of the next year's levy capacity that we base the 2.5% off.
But in terms of new growth, budgeting for new growth for this coming fiscal year,
right? We're at 800,000.
You got the way I look at that, you've got some room there.
We have some room, but in consultation with the assessor, given the timing of when projects are completed and when we submit, it is she is comfortable at 800,000 and would be hesitant to try to continue to raise it.
But if you look at your trend line, which is from 2014,
it's within that trend still.
The $1.2 million is within that trend.
The average over the last 10,
it's $1 million.
The average over the last 8 years has been approximately between just over $800,000.
That's true over 8 years, but the trend has been stabilized over the last, say, 5 or 6 of those years. We had 2 or 3 that were low, and then after that, it's been over $1 million.
I'll answer. There's a warning sign in the building department now with a slight slowdown on those.
There is, and if we overestimate,
not according to their market watch.
It's got yellow, I think, on that.
Well,
it's a conversation that we can continue to have.
Okay.
But
again, a placeholder.
Yeah, it's a placeholder. But I do rely on the assessor and her going out and during the year and reviewing permits to figure out what we can capture.
Okay.
We'd be taking a chance if we continue to increase it and we didn't meet it, because we would then have to make changes somehow in the opposite direction. So it's certainly a placeholder, and we can continue that discussion.
I would prefer to be conservative.
Okay.
A follow-up to Jim's question. For example, say we found $300,000 and we wanted to assign it to the NRTA, because we know in a couple of years we need that. If it went there now, would it fall to them as free cash and be there available? Or how would we say we found 300,000 this year, or 200,000?
Well, it's really great that we have town council here, because I don't know if we can actually just pay directly the NRTA, because it all comes off the cherry sheet, and I don't know if that would be a problem.
Yeah, but how, yeah, so I guess the question is, if we had the time now to put some money aside, how would we do that? So that
we could put it into a stabilization fund. We could leave it untapped, and it would continue to grow in unused levy capacity, and then we would have it available when we were going to get there.
Right, because I think that's pretty, I think Libby's concern is a,
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think,
okay.
so there is a way
But
to
it's
do
not,
it.
it's not a 2019 budget issue.
It
It is 2021 calendar year issue.
Yes.
So it's not, I mean,
It's actually a
we're-
July 1st, 2020 issue.
Okay,
So, yes.
FY 2021
Yes.
issue.
Yeah, correct.
So it's 2 years from now. We're going to have a better indication about the implications of revenue in terms of fees versus, so I'd rather not encumber funds right now for that. There are a lot of other risks in the budget. And so I just, that's just my kind of budgeting philosophy.
I'm really conservative, and I worry we're going to get a savings this year and next year on health insurance, and then that's going to peel away, and we're going to have the negotiations that are ongoing. We're all going to get laid on, and so if we have the money to put away now, I think it would be a smart thing to do. But anyway, that's.
So we could take it. There's a lot of risk. We could fund a bunch of stuff that's not here.
Yep.
So.
So, along the lines of the expense increase requests, town departments submitted to town administration $3,729,000 worth of requests. We've determined that we were able to fund $1,256,000 of those requests, $273,900 of those being one-time requests, and then ongoing requests of $983,000. We've been able to fund those through a variety of different methodologies, which these are the requests that we have funded in the budget here and pay on slide 10. Okay.
I don't know if you want us to take you through the specific requests, but we can just maybe quickly mention them. The Capital Projects Manager, DPW/DPW Facilities Director, that title is still a little bit iffy, but the point is that we need a town-wide Capital Projects Manager, and the bulk of the projects are mostly in DPW. There is some additional narrative about each of these in the budget message. So the detail is in there. DPW would be allocated an additional mechanic now that we have a central fleet maintenance division at DPW. We think it's important to staff it and keep town vehicles and DPW equipment running. HR is allocated for a benefits coordinator. It's pretty clear that we need dedicated resources to monitor, track, and make sure we're compliant with benefit-related regulations and requirements. Part-time building inspector, that is something that I think we at least need coming up and going forward for some period of time anyway, and unless building permits really do level off or get reduced.
I just have one comment on that. That's a 0.5 position.
It's a half-time, yep.
And so the dollars of 2 times 72 is 140. That seems, that's a big expense for, and maybe that's the market rate, but when I was looking at it for relative things.
I'll just point out that on the approved EIRs on the personnel side, as noted by footnote 1, that includes the provision for health insurance in that number as well.
For all of them?
Yes.
Right, I understand that.
Okay.
So I'm just comparing that to the facilities project manager, but that's just a comment. So.
We're recommending a senior planner / code enforcement position in plus. Open meeting law compliance position. We talked about that here a couple weeks ago when we were giving the board an open meeting law update, and I think that is actually a position we're going to try to fund now. And that position would also, hopefully, the idea is take on some minute-taking responsibilities and meeting posting responsibilities so that we could alleviate the town clerk's office from most of their posting responsibilities, which would free them up a bit. And then there are some increases in overtime, shift coverage, and reclassifications throughout the various departments. The next series of recommendations relates to expense requests. And maybe I won't go through every single one of these, but depending on how you all want it to be explained. But the first item there is $50,000. It's a one-time item for Board of Selectmen strategic plan implementation. This is a bit of a swag number, but we wanted to have something available for the board in the event that there might be something you want to do after strategic planning. So that's just a bit of a placeholder. Mobile bathroom trailer for Surfside or Cisco Beach. This would be a funding source not out of the general fund. I think we talked about the
Beach
revolver. And then some vehicle replacements, a building study for the Sconset Fire Station. This is something we talked about last year. It didn't end up getting funded last year, but the idea is that building is pretty well not in good shape on the interior, and we'd like to get it in better shape so that it can maybe be used for some real things like meetings, training, possibly a housing unit. We don't really know, but we think it's worth taking a look at. Some mechanical CPR devices for fire, and that would come out of the ambulance reserve fund. Election-related expenses for town clerk, and some other expense items here throughout the departments. Some increase in DPW line items, which would relate to supplies, materials, repair and maintenance funds, things of that nature that help maintain our infrastructure. The municipal employee housing rent item, the idea here is that when we have a higher level employee that we're probably going to have to recruit from elsewhere, that we have a housing unit available so that when they're hired, they have somewhere that's already been secured for them. They would then take on the rental payments, and we would perhaps be able to find another unit that we could secure and do the same way. But we've been finding that if we have something available, it's going to be much easier to end up hiring someone. And then
I just have a comment there, and that's not so much the amount of the line item, but I think it would be helpful to town administration if the board had a policy on housing of town employees. Whether it's basic on some job grade or something. We just recently lost a highly qualified management manager in the DPW because of lack of housing. And I think it's when we bring folks here and we don't give them the opportunity to find reasonable housing, it results in turnover that's not good for them or for us. So this could be dramatically underfunded.
Thank you. I don't know if there's any other items in there that you would want to hear more about, but they're in the budget message. Do you want to go, Brian, to the...
So the funding sources for the $1,256,000 are as noted here: tax levy and general revenues, free cash, other funds being ambulance reserve and beach improvement revolver, and some departmental budget reallocations that would occur to fund some of the positions. So preliminary free cash, the way that we are based on what we're recommending at this point, the general fund certified free cash, it was certified by DOR at $6,215,000. One-time expense increase requests in the general fund budget for municipal operations total $192,000. School one-time expense increase request total $133,000. It's important to note that this is consistent with our free cash policy to use it only for one-time expenses in the general fund and not directed towards annual ongoing operating expenses. We've proposed to fund town and school capital projects in the amount of $4,605,000. Those currently are going through capital program committee review as well. And then the $800,000 that was included on the previous slide, we would recommend and propose funding through free cash. At this point, we would leave approximately $484,000 unallocated, which would be consistent with our goals to try to leave some available in the event of anything that may come up, throughout the remainder of this process.
Do you know how much we had last year unallocated?
It was about roughly $4,000, and the reason that it was that way was because last year we set aside $1.5 million to potentially transfer, which we did transfer to the solid waste enterprise fund for potential deficits within that fund. So, absent that last year, we would have left some on the table to be reallocated or to be allocated as we went through this, if the need be. So as the town manager noted, we have some, and a slide I'm sure that everybody will gloss over, and I'll do my best to make it as easy to understand as possible with our Island Home. The current projected operating deficit for fiscal 19 at our Island Home, and this still is preliminary as we move through the enterprise fund budgetary process, is $3.9 million. The status quo recommendation would be that we fund $1,511,000 out of the general fund, which is consistent with what we did in fiscal 18. It's important to note that in the September presentation, because I know there's been some questions about all of these numbers, because retained earnings and free cash hadn't been certified at that point, we were thinking that we may have to fund a slightly higher number. We had put in that operating presentation $2.5 million. Retained earnings, as you can see, were certified at $5.3 million, so they were better than anticipated. So the status quo would have us funding $2.4 million from the certified retained earnings from our Island Home and continue the $1,511,000 appropriation in the general fund. We presented a range of options and possibilities for discussion. We've discussed these internally, and we do, as you can see, do have a recommendation, but I will take you through all of them. Option one would be that we increase the usage of retained earnings and decrease the general fund subsidy by 50%. So we would fund out of the general fund through taxation and other revenues $755,723. It would increase the need for retained earnings to $3,159,000 from retained earnings for our Island Home. Another potential solution to continue to fund other initiatives in the general fund would be to fund the operating deficit solely by the use of retained earnings, which is what's noted in option 2, and that would then leave the town with $1,511,000 to discuss other initiatives or recommendations for its usage. Option 3 would be to propose an override of the tax levy for the full value of the operational deficit, which would allow us to propose additional budgetary items based on the additional flexibility that it would grant us. After much discussion internally, our recommendation is option 1, to reduce the subsidy to $755,000. Knowing that the discussion about an override for the operational deficit is really part of a much broader discussion about the plan and what the Island Home is going to look like, we felt at this time that it wasn't the most prudent time to bring forth an operational override, but want to stress that it is a discussion, and we've made this note many times in the budget presentations and so forth, that it is a discussion that will be needed to have at some point and more than likely proposed. So again, our recommendation would be to reduce the operational subsidy from the general fund to the $755,000, and on slide 14, this denotes some of the possibilities that we would be able to fund with that additional capacity within the general fund.
We don't have any numbers on this slide because we felt that if the board didn't endorse the 755 number or any of it, that we'd be creating false expectations by having numbers in there that might indicate that things would be funded and they wouldn't be, or people might latch on to the numbers too much. But these items could all be funded in some amount of funding with $755,000.
So we're going to discuss this.
Yes.
I look forward to other people's comments.
Want me to start? I'll start.
Sure.
I like option one. I'm worried about doing a tax override for it, especially if we don't have our sort of operational selves and our, if we don't have our house in order, I think it's premature to put an override in place. I just think that there's certain things that we have to figure out over there, that if we put an override for this and an override for the building, we may just kick down the road. And I think, by doing it this way, they will stay front and center. And then we can decide, if we can decide whether to move forward. So I just think that this is a good way to do it.
I agree. I think an override is a possibility in the future, but it would make more sense once we truly know what the island home's going to be for the future, and what our expenses will be. I am inclined to go with town administration's recommendation. I think they put a lot of thought and effort into it, and there's quite a large amount of money sitting in retained earnings. It seems logical to use more of it and cover some other expenses in the general fund.
It seemed use more of it, but I think but also protect us from any loss of CPE payments. Is that sort of what option one does?
The CPE payments, while we've been getting them and they've been substantial in recent years, it looks like it may be a little less in this year than it has been.
Right.
And they're just, our concern is that they're uncertain annually. They have been continuing, they've increased, but there's just no telling when they're going to end or when they're not going to end. So it's a struggle to.
Did you get a sense from Julian when you met with him about?
We really didn't.
No, they don't know. I mean,
Okay.
they're aware of the issue and
He's
they're supportive of it.
Yeah.
But they didn't have a clear answer, and they are trying to get more clear answers for us.
So, I mean, I think our hope is obviously that it continue in a strong manner, but we don't want to put all our eggs in that basket.
So maybe I'm remembering wrong, but I thought we had in the past used some retained earnings from our island home for another purpose. And could you remind me of that in the
Yes,
amount?
the only thing that we have ever used retained earnings from the island home for are one of two things: to help with the operational deficit, and to fund capital such as renovations or things at the island home. They've not been used for anything else other than that I could find.
Okay. I thought one year we took some for solid waste or something to pay for.
No. I could not find anything from
Okay. So-
island home specifically for that. No.
So is that another option to fund capital? Is it 625?
Yes. So we would also propose that would be funded by retained earnings as well.
Is that in your?
That's not in this proposal, but if option one was agreeable and amenable and to everybody, and it was the consensus, the 2.1 would be reduced to about $1.5 million when you took out the 625. That's not part of this, but it is a recommendation to the capital committee to fund that additional.
Yep. I think it'd be good to have that reflected so the board understood the real impact of the retained earnings, which is another reduction of 625.
Right. So if we kept the status quo, the retained earnings would be approximately just over $2.2 million, and then 1.5. Since option 2 and 3 probably aren't going to be really discussed much, we're looking at the first two. So you'd be looking at about just under 2.3 million, and then right around 1.5 million total.
Will we eventually have to get to doing the override option 3? Is that coming down the road?
Yeah. My belief is it is. I think that we're funding, there's an operational deficit, and retained earnings was not going to last forever to fund such large portions of it. So I do believe at some point, and again, the reason that we went with option one was because we think that the override discussion really, to echo Matt's point, is really, since we're still working through all of what it's going to look like and et cetera, it makes sense to continue to have the discussion, knowing that it will be upon us at some point.
I'll just make a general comment that we've been able to operate the island home with the general fund subsidizing the operations over time. I really see this as a kind of a windfall to the general fund, and I would like to see us, maintain the retained earnings. So that's just. I'm just trying to. I'm looking for a philosophy on how you would use retained earnings, and to me, you don't. I think, so to date, the status quo is the general fund has funded the operating the deficit, and if we're going to make a change, I'd like to see us have some kind of framework for that, like. We're always going to maintain X for retained earnings, or again, being conservative. Sure. I think, and with this model, you're bringing it down to 1.4. That seems, or 1.5. That seems a little low, given the history of where.
Well, the history with retained earnings, I believe, is in one of the appendices, and it has been around that number consistently. The reason that it is so high is that. Essentially, 2 years ago, we got a very large CPE payment that we're no longer getting because it was a culmination of more than 1 year, which generated that extremely large retained earnings.
So if we say we want to keep retained earnings of X, you could have a policy that says it's an average of the last 5 years or something. I mean, just from your perspective as the chief financial officer. To me, I'd like to see what from a conservative standpoint, we should be maintaining in retained earnings.
Well, I think that since we began the discussion about our island home, we've over the course of the last 3 years that I've been here, we have spoken in depth and repeatedly about the fact that using any type of retained earnings from there to fund the operating deficit is not the ideal position, because it is a scenario that retained earnings are not guaranteed from year to year. We've enjoyed the fact that we have had them and able to do it. But to have that discussion and you take that type of position, we essentially are saying we have to have an override. So given the fact that I don't know whether the voters would support an override at this point without a more concrete plan in place about what the future holds and what the model looks like. We're left with a recommendation to continue that until we have all of that fleshed out and can make what I believe is a much stronger and valid argument to override the levy limit. So,
but if you use 1.3 million a year, you're going to be out of retained earnings pretty darn quick.
We probably, in all honesty, if we hadn't generated $5.6 million 2 years ago, we probably would be at that point right now. Right. Mm-hmm. But we've had the luxury of that increase in retained earnings, which has helped us or given us the ability to work on this, come up with a solution to what is certainly a very dynamic and evolving question about our island home.
And it's not just the voters that we have to worry about. We have to negotiate with the unions, and we have to get, changes at the union level if we want to go from one type of operation to another. If we want to house people, there's a bunch of things that we may need, which we have no idea whether they'll accept. So I just think that I think it's very premature. I think that we need to figure out what we're doing and how we're going to do it, and get everyone on board before we. Sort of put it in there permanently or buy a building permanently or anything else.
But we're going to be on a path pretty quickly, because what I hear you say, recommendation is that you want to reduce by 50% the operating subsidy from the general fund. Okay?
That's the
I'm
recommendation.
trying to get a
That is the
policy around
recommendation,
this, and
yes.
okay, so that's your policy. We want to, so going forward, we only want to spend $755 a year or $750 from the general fund. That's de facto what you're saying.
That's the recommendation for this year. I don't want to, next year could be something completely different, to be honest with you. I'm not sure. That's the recommendation for what we believe the town needs in order to operate and provide the services for next year in fiscal 19 to the residents and to the visitors to the island.
So it's not necessarily the intention to continue on the exact same path. It's because we have so much in retained earnings right now.
Yeah, we believe that it's a prudent course to do at this point, you know.
So the only worry is that some of that funding will go towards new positions, not one-time expenditures.
Well, that's the recommendation on slide 14. With some of that would be that there would be some new positions filled with it.
Yeah.
That's a recommendation from town administration. That's
which
correct.
are positions that I agree we need, but we do have to think about what happens next
So what
next year.
you're encumbering the retained earnings moving forward to fund those positions in the next fiscal years.
In a manner of speaking, yes, we're transferring the cost to the island home. Sure, I mean that's
So it's not a one-time thing. And so the island home, and they're going to run out of money. And so then what do we do with these positions? You're going to have to, when the retained earnings is gone, you're going to have to find money in the general fund to keep those positions in place.
Sure.
So I guess it's just not, you know.
I would just bring the board's recollection back to the last 2 years. We've had a very similar discussion to this about a potential override in connection with Island Home so that the general fund subsidy can be freed up for the general fund. And every year we've had this discussion, going back to when Bobby was on the board, at least twice he brought it up. And we are kicking the can down the road here. And I think I completely hear what Jim is saying about this, and we share some of those concerns. We feel that these town expenses are important to add into our operations to get the things done that we think we need to get done and that there's public demand for. And at some point, sooner rather than later, I think we're saying we really need to seriously consider an operating override. I don't think we're desperate for an override for fiscal 19, and sometimes you need to get to a point where that's the only option. We think we're getting to that point. Every year since we started talking
I think we are
about
too.
it.
I'm worried that by fiscal 20 we still won't have a definitive town meeting approved plan that's going to get the support for an override. But I know that there are other things that could be rearranged in the budget. So I'm still willing to go with the recommendation for this year.
We thought, we have been working on this for some time now, and we had a lot of discussion about maybe we need to recommend 0 expense increase requests, because the funding, it could be uncertain going forward with the NRTA. I know that it's thought that may not be so much of an issue, but the island home is uncertain too, and the other things that we mentioned earlier, and they're going to have to be funded going forward or not, if we're going to keep up with what our community is expecting.
Madam Chair, can I ask, if we were to do option 3, whether it's next year, 2 years from now, or now, so it's an override, goes to the voters. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't pass, what happens?
We would have to fund the budget through one of these other various options, status quo, one or two.
Through general fund or through
we'd still have to fund it one of these ways.
If there's any there.
If the voters failed to approve doing this, we'd still have a gap that we'd have to fund.
So you have a risk, and then if you go to the voters with no retained earnings, there's not a lot. You're gonna be laying a lot of people. You're gonna be laying people off. If you go to them with some retained earnings, you've got yourself some leeway, but just
laying people off from our island home or just in general? just to, I mean, laying people off just in
Town
general.
administration, yeah.
I'm fine with option one.
Oh, sorry.
Option.
No, I'm sorry.
We still
Well,
going?
did we want to take a vote on this? Or did we want to go through the rest of the budget first?
Whatever the board's pleasure is, I mean, I think that it's probably from some of the comments, it's kind of a placeholder that you may, I don't
Do
know
you
if we
want us
want
to
more
wait?
discussion on or.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
okay.
think we want to get through the rest of it, and I think you might want to think about it beyond tonight, maybe.
Great.
So I think this is where I turn it back over to the town manager to discuss priorities and accomplishments within the budget.
So we've just listed here some items that we believe are administration priorities and priorities of the board for 2019. And board is in red because we don't have a goal document specifically, but these are all items that you've discussed and we have discussed with you. And I think they're pretty well laid out, but if not, it would be good to know now. So I won't go through.
Okay, go ahead. You want to discuss those now, or are you going to go through them all? Or?
I wasn't really going to go through
So
each
I'd like
one,
to
but
comment. I've
sure.
got some comments on the in terms of our priority for 2019. I know we're going through this strategic planning process, but as I look through the budget and the capital budget, and what shame on me for not thinking about this as we've gone through it, but so much we hear so much in our world about information technology and the huge investments that are being made by corporations, and I assume municipalities. And I don't know if we've really had a conversation here. And I'm no expert in that area, but I think it would behoove us to consider having a pretty broad discussion about what our goals are for information technology for the town of Nantucket. And then the other thing I had is, I know it's not on the capital budget, but I think we should be rethinking the Nantucket sewer project and continue to be planning that or developing strategies around that. And I think we should, personally, I think we should do that during the course of of 2019, so we can move forward at some point in the future. Those are my two comments.
Do you want me to address them or just accept them? It's up to you.
This is the board's chance to make comments, and I'm just making comments. I'd like to hear from other board members or not.
Well, Jim, I can definitely echo the technology part. I was going to bring it up, and you did before I did. Looking at all the goals, I really like them all. In the public information transparency goals, we're doing that in FY19 by hiring another person, kind of driven by open meeting law, but that'll help. But the use of technology is a discussion I like to have, whether it's the strategic planning we have in January or more specific for FY19. I know we're having a CTO possibly will be hired soon. I think that'll help drive a lot of those discussions, Jim, but I agree with you on the technology part, IT.
And the Nantucket sewer, I don't know, Olivia, if you were going to mention it, but it's maybe one step back, but it is looking at keeping Nantucket water quality at the top of the list with discussions around a Nantucket water quality study and working on refining what that study would be and, really including the landfill, the contributions the landfill is making towards it and seeing what information we have so that we can move forward with ensuring that Nantucket has good water quality. But I
think we'll be able to do that without sewering.
I think that the intention at this stage is to just review the information that we have and see where there's gaps. And in light of the vote at town meeting for sewer, I think looking at all of the options and reassessing whether sewer is the only answer.
So that would come under water quality.
Yeah.
I would guess that we will end up back to proposing sewering Nantucket. I think it will be helpful to get further along or closer to finished with the current project, so people see how it's gone and the final dollars.
Yeah.
one thing I mentioned in the agenda meeting today, I think that we are, it's an interesting time right now. I think that we're overdue for a downturn of some type. No one can predict exactly when. It feels like we're overdue. It feels like it should happen soon. I think some of the indicators are showing that. Potentially if the tax plan goes through, that could hit the island a bit. One of the things I think on some of these large projects that we should have as much shovel ready as possible. Doesn't mean we do them, but we have them ready to go. So when there is a downturn and people are hungry and are willing to bid, 12 million instead of 18 million or 10 million instead of 18, you put out Nantucket for a bid and instead of 80, it's 30, then all of a sudden we're ready to go. And so, so it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have all the money ready now, but you have to have your planning done and have everything ready. And I just think that you sort of, it's smart to be building when people want, need jobs. And I think and if 2 or 3, 4 years from now it hasn't happened, well, we're going to be spending what we're going to spend anyway. And we don't have the money to spend it yet anyhow. So that was just one thing that I've been thinking about. And then the other part is when I look at the budget, I think it was page 67, 68, we have 2.5 million of new growth and levy limit increase, and we have 2.5 million of wage increases. They wipe each other out. And then we have the increases on OPEB and other issues. And we were lucky that, the insurance went down this year. But I think that, to me, is one of the most problematic issues that we face, is that we don't budget within our means. And we're told it's impossible, it can't happen, it won't work. And so that's why we have all this stuff outside of the budget. The wages are crowding everything else out. So that we have to have overrides, we have to have free cash to do maintenance and repair. Maintenance and repair should be part of your budget. So I just think that, hopefully when we go through some of the strategic planning, we'll find a way to begin to address that. And, and I won't be saying this 10 years from now.
Anything else about the goals? Okay. So the next slide is how we would hope to address the initiatives, needs, and goals with our budget recommendations. We have additional funding proposed in public works and facilities for infrastructure and ongoing maintenance issues. We have some additional positions to address issues of concern like projects, code enforcement, with staff positions in plus, town admin, DPW, HR a little bit, water quality. We've got some money going to efforts there. Code enforcement I mentioned. Plan updates. We've got a number of plans that need to be updated, and then there's implementation of them, including what's listed up there, hazard mitigation, coastal resiliency, which is just getting started, the open space and recreation plan. We have a harbors plan that's going to come up in the next couple of years, and all of those need staff resources to get at. Community public health. This I might be going a little beyond what I meant to do with this slide, but there was a request from the health department for a public community health position, and what we're recommending is that the human services director position, which is held by Rachel, and she's also currently obviously acting as the Island Home Administrator. Once we have a new Island Home Administrator hired, hopefully shortly, within fiscal 18, the proposal is to combine Health and Human Services into one department and to have the Human Services Director position take on the public community health component. We've talked to Roberto and Rachel about that, and I think there is support for it and enthusiasm about it. So that's how we would address that in a different way than locating additional funding. We have ongoing efforts to reduce expenses that increase efficiency and transparency. They're listed here. Some of these are the same as last year because they are ongoing. We do review staffing whenever key positions become vacant and try to combine and consolidate duties where appropriate, like in the example that I just gave about Health and Human Services, cross-training staff. We're really working to increase educational and training opportunities for employees so that they can take on work that we might otherwise hire out and or gain expertise for particular, more specialized types of projects like project management. We often are reviewing and refining internal controls. We're really hoping to seek a second community compact grant. We haven't, we're hoping to get at that after the first of the year. And we're looking at a grant right now with Remain for a recycling coordinator position. That would be in the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund, so that hasn't come before you yet. But we're hoping to get funding secured sometime soon so we could get at that position in fiscal 18.
Would that be ongoing support from them?
It would not.
Okay.
It would probably be similar to what happened with the housing specialist and the energy coordinator, where they gave sort of initial funding, and then we would take it on over time.
So again, to Matt's point, that's a future commitment that we would have to fund.
So we have some outstanding items and current unknowns, the strategic plan, which we're going to know more about once the process is concluded. We've had some discussion about potential future tax overrides specific to our island home, possibly NRTA. Collective bargaining issues aren't totally resolved yet for contracts that expired June 30th, 2017. We won't know state aid till probably, who knows when, March, April, May, June, after possibly after the budget is adopted. But we've heard state administration officials talking about keeping state aid level or increased, not reduced. Chapter 90, kind of about the same thing. The Harbor Place project we'll know more about as we move down that path. The federal tax reform and other legislative changes, I think that's obvious. We don't know exactly what's going to happen there. I don't think we've totally analyzed the potential cost impact of the citizen warrant articles that might have a potential cost impact, but in looking them over sort of very generally, I don't think there's anything that jumps out at us as something that we would need to address if it were legal and passed. Next steps. Next Tuesday, we're going to the school committee to give a much abbreviated version of what we gave you all tonight. January 3rd, you have a public hearing scheduled, and if the board isn't feeling ready for that public hearing, we could move that back a bit. The idea would be that the board would endorse a fiscal 19 general fund budget that we could then go to the finance committee with and start reviewing it with them around January 8th. We have review of the enterprise fund budgets and the county scheduled right now for your January 17th meeting. And then mid-January through mid-March, FinCom reviews all of the budgets and the other financial appropriations, culminating in annual town meeting on Tuesday, April 3rd.
But just a comment on your meeting with the school board. I recall from the expense breakdown slide that it's about 50% of the salaries are town and 50% are school, about. And given this potential windfall from the island home, would that argue? I think you should make the school committee aware of that, because they may say, well, we want 50% of that, given the way we do budgeting here. So
we have we would talk to the superintendent about that, and we did work. There would be a number worked in for them out of that, but I'm not sure that it would be half.
One of the things that they floated at our ad hoc budget meeting was instituting someone to teach Spanish in the Nantucket Intermediate School, and I think it's really important to start introducing language to the kids younger than we are right now. So that's just my plug as a parent.
So I don't know if, I know that you all might not even have had a chance yet to go through the documents in detail. Did you want to put this on your agenda again next week for additional discussion, or? Yes.
Sure.
Okay. In case more things come up, and if not, then, and then maybe you decide then if you want to proceed with the public hearing on the 3rd or not.
Will everyone be here on the 3rd?
I will.
Okay, that's what I you will? Okay.
So only you?
Yeah, just.
And are you away the following meeting?
I'm gone on the 10th.
Yeah, okay.
I might be gone on the 10th.
Okay.
I know. I never leave.
We need to have 3, but we don't want to discuss major issues when we're short.
Okay, the next town manager's report item is overview of fiscal 2019 capital project requests. I'm not quite sure about the best way to get at these, but just to give you a little bit of an update, we've been meeting with the capital program committee since October, quite a bit, to go over all of these projects. All of the departments have been in. They've developed their new, more detailed ranking methodology. And so I think we want to just quickly take you through these. And then today Capcom met, and what they would really like to know is there anything in this list of projects that jumps out at the board as something that is of serious concern that they should know about, so that they would maybe reconsider whether or not to recommend it? And how does the board feel about the potential funding sources so far? So we'll get to that in a second, but as you can see here, there's a fire item, the police marine item, renovation of the town pier office building and public restrooms. That is a pretty well-developed plan, very well-developed plan with a pretty strong expense projection. And that is also, we anticipate a $1 million grant to go to that, so it would reduce the cost of the town by $1 million. There's a lot of DPW items. We called this year a kind of a reset year for DPW. A lot of vehicle replacements, road repairs, stormwater improvements, the bridge repairs and engineering. The garage, as you heard last week, is a very large project. We haven't really had a chance to debrief from that internally yet, but we've had a little bit of discussion, and we are thinking that we might need to potentially regroup on that project. And instead of maybe asking for the 18 million or so number in fiscal 19, since there are some other large capital projects as well, that maybe we either think about seeking design funds or some kind of a phased option. But that does need a little bit more discussion. I don't think we're ready on a recommendation yet for that, but I think based on what we heard from the board, didn't sound like people were too ready to put forward an $18 million project. A lot of transportation projects. The Old South Road corridor item, $15 million. That would be a debt exclusion. And I think that's something that the board early on supported.
And is that enough?
Based on the funding numbers that we've seen, yes, we believe it will be enough to do the work.
Okay, and you added all your factors on top of that?
We've added our factors for engineering and any other costs outside of the report. So yes, we believe that is sufficient funding.
And there's a rough number. A third could be provided by the state on everything done on Milestone.
Okay.
We don't know that for sure.
And what sort of time frame is that for doing the work? Is that a 3-year project? Anyone know?
I would say it's probably at least a 3-year project, and we would borrow as we go. So not to borrow the entire amount all at once, right, Brian?
That's correct. We would, for the majority through the life of this project, we'd use bands to temporarily borrow and permanently borrow as we made progress. So we would not borrow immediately $15 million. We would borrow as necessary to fund this.
The town pier building and restrooms, where are we at in the process? Is that a rough estimate? Where is it with permitting? Because Chapter 91 and
it's
everything?
an engineered project, and the permits, I think, have been secured, or yes.
The estimates were provided by the engineers that did the concept plan and adjusted for recent projects here in the town, the experiences we've had. And there's been some waivers that have been obtained from the architectural board in terms of access and elevation things like that need to be done. Other than the building permit, I don't believe there's anything more that needs to be obtained.
Is this a total rebuild?
A complete rebuild. The old one is,
I just haven't seen
it
the
costs more to
drawings.
rehab it than it will be to replace it.
So Chief, it's in the conceptual design level rather than design documents or?
Well, we don't have the actual construction documents.
I know
yet.
not construction, but there's.
We have a preliminary.
You are at concept. There's conceptual design and construction. So which are you a conceptual? You have floor plans.
I would say it's conceptual.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the least. It's the least. So I just wonder.
Why don't we double check on that? I thought we had engineered plans.
No, engineered plans are actual blueprints for the construction. We don't have that yet because we don't have the funding for that. We have the concept plan where they gave us the different options, what could be done, where they do the space needs studies, what you need to have, et cetera.
This includes
And then
design.
the engineers come up with the estimates of the cost.
Right.
And now we go forward, get that. We've actually just submitted a grant application to fund some of the design costs. And then we have another already tentatively approved grant for $1 million of the construction costs.
I think typically I would prefer to have us further along in the development of the project before
We probably would prefer that too, but it was, the grant came up, which is why it got moved up a bit.
The state grant kind of dictated this.
Okay.
This was originally planned for next year.
So, we should be forewarned that the number may go up.
I don't think it will.
Well, okay, I'll remember you said that.
Okay.
But so on top of this 3450, there's another $1 million.
No, that's included in that, so it'll actually be less than 3.50.
Okay, so it's the town really needs to put up 2.5.
Correct.
Well, we need to, we
need
put
to
in our
approve it in case the
appropriation.
grant doesn't come through.
Well,
Because we are still working on exactly whether we're going to get paid the $1 million immediately or whether it's drawdown, we would authorize the borrowing for the $3.4 million. And ultimately, we would only borrow and exclude what we actually were required to pay. It's just I haven't been informed exactly the mechanics of this grant, so we need to be able to make sure that we have the authorization to cover, so we have no cash flow issues particularly related to this project.
Okay. What's the square footage? Do you know, roughly? Okay.
And can I assume that
I'm just curious what the square foot price is.
can I assume that this is going to be built to withstand flooding and that the wiring and things will come from above?
That's exactly it. The foundation is a blowout foundation.
Yep.
It's built up. That's the problem with the existing structure is it wasn't built that way, and the floor and the thing rotted out.
Yeah, and because my parents did the building down on the wharf, and all the wiring comes from above, we can get 2 feet of water, nothing, it doesn't matter. Okay.
the other transportation projects are shown here, and I should bring your attention to 6 Fairgrounds Area Road. That's the Waite Drive, it's currently called Road, and I think that is the final number.
And does that include the money from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, or is that?
That was going to be my question.
The $1.3 million in the capital this year is the total, and then the funding source, $400,000, would come from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
So we'll see that in the funding
Oh, that's
sources.
down
Yes,
here.
it should be down below in the funding
Yeah.
sources on the next page for everyone.
So
I see, yeah.
The 400's down there.
another couple of projects here, server virtualization, that is an IT project, and then a couple of school items. So those are the capital projects that we've discussed recommending in some form or another so far, and then the funding sources are here. So Brian, you want to take us through that?
Just a question on one of the projects. I
Oh,
don't
sure.
see, bike paths in here, or are there monies for bike paths in the coming fiscal year?
There's $100,000 for multi-use paths in the DPW piece. I think.
Can you go back, Erica?
Oh, I see it. Okay,
Yep.
but there's no big, there's no big bike path project that we're going to be working on this next year.
Just phase
No.
2 of Lover's Lane, right? Further Boulevard.
Surfside area roads, yeah, there'd be a bike path in there. But there's no other specifically new bike path, no.
My take on the bike paths, I would love to see, I would love to see I would love to see the sidewalks and the bike paths in and out of town completed at or before Old South Road. I just think they're not as much money, and they are as crucial or more crucial than Old South Road. I mean, if we ever want to get people, out of their cars, then we need to give them a safe way to walk and bike. And so I just think that, if you're asking for comments back to capital, I think that's a big comment of mine, is you need to give the alternatives. It's unsafe to bike right now. It's unsafe to walk in some areas during the summer. So let's focus on that along with making it easier for cars.
But you've not proposed any bike paths.
Not for 19. Mike can probably speak to what is
So I think
proposed.
at least for you heard from two board members, we should be doing more bike paths and more sidewalks.
Well, I know there's some money. Like, I know that there's a couple $1 million of sidewalks downtown, et cetera, but I just think as a policy, we need to keep it front and center,
I agree.
or cars will be king.
But there's some other things in the works. There's some design that's ongoing right now. There is a Pleasant Street sidewalk project listed here, which has been, I think, talked about quite a bit, and that would help with the pedestrian
Yep.
access in and out of town, as well as the Four
that's a
Corners intersection.
Major connection.
Yeah.
Can I add in that? So it doesn't seem like it's going to help bikes and pedestrians for the roundabouts. It looks like that's the design for different roundabouts. That is more safe for bikes.
Yeah,
and
those do help.
pedestrian. It doesn't seem like it. It seems more chaotic, but other studies show.
But the problem is if there's no connector, and there's no way to get into the downtown safely, they're just not going to go on the bike to begin with. There's too many families that say to me, we don't bike anymore. I don't mope anymore. It's not safe. So I just think that we need to find a way to get, to get in and out of town safely.
I mean, like you talked about, I forget what we need someone in charge of things. So we need somebody in charge of sidewalks and bike paths. Who's the boss of that? I mean, it seems to be a little diffused in my mind.
Well, we do have a transportation improvement plan, and those items are listed in it, and DPW and planning have been meeting on a regular basis to put all of those projects together and get them put forward.
I think it is a good idea to be more explicit that bike paths are a priority. I think there are benefits sort of hidden in many of these projects, but I think it is a good idea to, as a board, to say explicitly that we'd like to see it prioritized.
So that's feedback to give to the capital.
Yeah, that would be my thing.
Great, thank you. So, funding sources?
Sure. So to fund the $47 million, this does include the DPW garage. There'd be potentially, we propose $38,950,000 in debt exclusions, being the Old South Road corridor transportation dollars, the DPW garage. There's $3.5 million in stormwater improvements that we have proposed funding via this debt exclusion. And then, excuse me, this also includes $2.45 million for the Harbor Master Building. Free cash, as earlier presented, is $4.6 million in funding for this various capital projects. We have put in here a capital exclusion because we know there's been a push for infrastructure and maintenance. So there's $1.8 million of this we were proposed funding through a capital exclusion. Exactly what the mechanics would be on how it would appear on the ballot is still in discussions on how we wanted to do it. Excuse me.
What does that mean, capital exclusion?
It'd be one-time raise of the tax rate for $1.8 million to fund capital projects.
For 1 year.
For 1 year.
Okay, so that's not a debt.
It's not a debt exclusion. It's a one-time raise of $1.8 million to fund.
Have we done those recently?
Not in my tenure, but it's a vehicle that we're proposing.
No, I know it's new.
Yes.
I'd not heard of it, so that's why I'm asking the question.
Not while I've been here, but it is available to us rather than borrowing long-term for those. Capital from the operating budget in $898,000, as previously had noted. Potential prior year capital article reauthorizations for some available funding from completed projects, the $400,000 from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the $1 million for the state grant related to the Harbor Master building. And then there's $22,416 of bond premium proceeds that are not related to debt excluded debt that we can allocate to various capital projects.
We'll go back to capital exclusion. Are those typically things that would be paid for from free cash?
They could be paid from free cash would be one funding source, sure.
Okay. In our history, that's
absolutely.
where we've been funding capital.
Sure, absolutely. But I think that we've heard the board's focus on infrastructure, and with the DPW reset of their capital, there's significant capital items that need to be addressed, and this is a proposal to address some of those.
So this is mostly DPW, the 1.8?
The majority of it, I believe, is associated with some either with those projects. I'd have to go back. I apologize. I thought I had included this. This is my fault for not including the exact breakdown available to you. So I will get that to the town manager.
So, I mean, just so we're aware, this you're asking for another funding mechanism for capital, in this case, mostly DPW, that's outside of our historical ways of raising capital funding.
It is a new methodology to fund additional capital. That is correct. Are we moving on? Yeah, sure. Yep, sorry. So we've also presented all of the potential projects from the various enterprise funds. The airport, $9.5 million. Supplemental project funding for Ireland Homes, $625,000. Sewer has some substantial projects that they need that have been proposed for $21 million. Next slide. Solid waste, the continuation of landfill mining, the cardboard baler replacement, and sorting station repairs. And then Sconset and Wannacomet both have some water main replacements, and that actually should, and water tank maintenance on both of those. It shouldn't say replacement. It should say water tank maintenance for both Wannacomet and Sconset. Those projects would be funded in the following ways: borrowing authorizations, airport, AIP, and state grants for the airport. Tax revenue and free cash would fund the landfill mining, the $700,000. Retained earnings from OIH would fund their supplemental project authorization. Retained earnings from the sewer fund would fund approximately $1.7 million of those projects. Everything $500,000 and under, we proposed funding from the retained earnings. Solid waste retained earnings, which are approximately $2.7 million, we've proposed funding the baler replacement and the sorting station repairs. And then Wannacomet is working together on both Sconset and Wannacomet. Currently, they have proposed borrowings for that total, but I believe that the water tank maintenance could be funded in whole or in part by retained earnings from both of those. They're working through some calculations to look at that.
So that's not going to have an impact on water rates?
No.
That
would be funded. So the $303,000 and the $658,000, no, because it'd be funded by the retained earnings, potentially. We've asked them to look at that, and they are working on that.
And what's in the borrowing 4191? What kind of borrowings?
Well, that right now is a total of the 3533 and the 658. So the water main replacement of 3.5 would be borrowed, but that's consistent with the way they funded all of their water main replacement projects to date.
Okay.
So,
and are you confident that the airport with $9 million, 5.5 back, you confident that it's sort of an empty airport? Are you confident they're going to be able to pay that money back? Or?
Yes, I am confident.
All right.
So I want to go back to capital exclusion. So that's this is a separate article?
Yes.
Okay. So it's at risk for being turned down by the town at town meeting.
It's not a separate article
It would be part of Article 10
as a funding source.
as a funding source, but it would require a ballot question, which we are at risk of it being turned down.
Okay. So I'd like to know, or I think, what of the things you're going to pay for, what untoward consequences of that, and what's management's plan to substitute other things in case it doesn't get approved?
Okay. Absolutely.
Madam Chair, can I throw one thing in on the sewer? I think the replacement with the water company, kind of going along with their projects and the National Grid projects, that's about $10 million in those three projects, but there's about a 30% savings. That's what David Gray was telling me of doing them at the same time. So those are opportunity. Those were scheduled later, right? But since everybody's talking at the same time.
One thing that I will note is specifically with the Surfside area improvements, the $5.1 million, we have been notified that that's included on the intended use plan with the state revolving fund. So the potential is there for a low interest loan, much like we have with Nantucket Harbor, Shemlo, and Plus. So that is something, it would still be a borrowing, but there is the potential for participation in the SRF. The phase 2 upgrades also would be eligible for that as well. So that's all I have.
I'll ask you that. I'll ask it offline.
Okay, so
I think we're done.
we can bring anything else up next week.
So next week we'll do the budget again. Did you want to do capital again next week? Or we'll convey your issues to them?
I don't think we'll have any rankings or anything by next week, will we? 'Cause that would help.
No,
No.
probably not.
But you're going to come back with a revised recommendation, either to delay the DPW garage or do something different?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're going to have that recommendation ready for your meeting next week because we need to do some work on that, but we will be back at some point
So
with that.
we'll
yes.
probably put capital into January for
Probably.
further discussion.
Yeah.
Hopefully there'll be some more news on recommendations. Okay, I guess we're on to Selectmen's reports and comments. Discussion regarding the structure content of a potential memorandum of understanding with the Harbor Place owners, review of requested zoning changes in connection with the project. And we have council here for this discussion, as well as planning.
Madam Chairman, I'm not sure exactly how you want to get at this item, but what I asked town council to be here for was to review with you what sorts of components are generally found in a memorandum of understanding such as this. And I think we're going to be probably getting a draft one from the Harbor Place owners at some point for the board to react to. And I imagine if there are items that you'd want to see in it, we would start compiling them. We do have a Harbor Place work group meeting next Tuesday, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about this again there. And there was requests last week to get more information specifically about the zoning change or changes that would be required and what their impact is. So I think John can talk a bit about the MOU structure, and Leslie can talk about the zoning changes.
Good evening. So I think in terms of the MOU, what I would recommend the board think about is the process that you went through with Richmond Development for their project. If you recall, I think it was, 2 years ago now? Prior to the zoning change that permitted that development, the board sat down with Richmond Development and with town administration and town council to negotiate an MOU, and that should be executed prior to the town meeting, any town meeting vote to change the zoning. And so if you recall, that MOU contained a number of items, and I would encourage the board to think about what it is you would be looking for in Harbor Place.
So three of us weren't on the board then. So when you say you may recall, three of us don't recall.
I meant to ask who's new to the board. So, essentially what was in that agreement, and what I would encourage you to do is, you can certainly have even though the zoning is changed, you can certainly have an agreement with the owners of the property to develop the property along certain parameters. In the Richmond MOU, there was a limitation on the number of dwelling units and bedrooms and that kind of thing, and I would think you would want to look at that pretty carefully with respect to Harbor Place. There was also discussion and commitments in that MOU for any infrastructure needs that the town might have or that the Board of Selectmen would be looking for. And so you would want a commitment from Harbor Place to do that. And certainly, well, those are really the two main items that I would recommend the work group think about. As we did with the Richmond project, I don't see any reason why you can't have the owners of the property and the developers take at least a first stab at submitting a proposal to the board, perhaps through the work group, and that would be your starting document for discussion, and by no means would that be the end of it. One of the things that happened with Richmond was we were negotiating that agreement right up to the special town meeting, and that wasn't the ideal way to do it. I think it would be much better to get it done ahead of time, because I think, in particular with the Harbor Place project, there are going to be a lot of questions from the public and about exactly what this is going to look like. And if you want it to be successful, which I assume everybody does, you want to have that document out there well in advance of town meeting. The Finance Committee had a role in reviewing the MOU and making suggestions, and I think you probably would want to include, again, the Finance Committee as well. So it might be good for the work group to review that MOU for Richmond. I happen to have a signed copy with me if you want me to leave it off, and maybe you can make copies of that, and just to get a sense as to the kinds of things that go in that you may want to be thinking about.
It would probably be helpful to circulate that to this entire board.
But the work group's not going to negotiate the MOU. No. This Board of Selectmen is going to negotiate the MOU. So when you say the work group does it's really the board that's going to be doing that.
Right, but I assume, isn't the work group going to be making recommendations, or I mean, maybe that's an assumption that's...
Yeah. We're studying impacts.
Yeah, it's all up, that's why we're here talking about it.
Yeah.
Right. But ultimately, it will be the Board of Selectmen that negotiates and signs that MOU. That's correct.
What was it's a rhetorical question, I guess, but how long did this take with Richmond? What was the timeline? When did you start? I'm just, when I hear things like we negotiated right up to the end. I mean, that concerns me in terms of getting public input and feedback, especially if we're talking about an intermodal transportation center. And I'm not directing that to you. I'm just saying either the board members are here or town administration. What vehicle did you use to knock this out?
So I think if my memory serves me correctly, Jim, it was at least a 2-month process. And I'm sorry? And we signed it the night of town meeting. Now, a lot of that had to do with getting the drafting done and having Richmond react to things that we had asked for. And, I'm sure if you asked them, they would say there were delays on the town's part. But my recollection was we spent a lot of time waiting for Richmond to react to things that we wanted to do. So if you're planning to have this done for the April town meeting, we really have to start now.
Yeah, we have 3.5 months.
Yeah.
And that really means we should have about 2.5 months.
Well, and don't forget, for Richmond, we had an economic impact analysis, which they disagreed with,
right?
And the planning board sent that out and had that peer reviewed, and the peer review came back and said it was closer than not, and we didn't follow didn't follow it anyway. So this is
So you had that before the MOU?
Yeah, this was all happening along that line because, but a lot of this I think is driven sometimes by the developer, not from the town. I think the things that we need to know, we need to figure out from our side what the impacts are. What are the various impacts? We have to know, what is it going to cost us if we own the roads and take care of all the roads? What is it going to cost the town if they own if we build a parking garage and we own it? How many units are going to be down there? What's that going to impact on parking? All those different answers, and that has to be from our side. That isn't something. I think we can peer review it maybe, but those, and what are the impacts on the town, on the DPW, and on the town? All that has to be understood before we can even go to MOU. I think sometimes we put the cart before the horse. We try to write an MOU, and then and so that's why I sort of was pressuring, and I think some of this is really important to understand before we agree to things.
Just to clarify, I think the financial report wasn't before the MOU. I think it was required in the MOU, and we reviewed it.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think that's
correct.
Yeah.
And it was subject to review by the planning board, by the finance committee. Now, the town has also retained a consultant, I believe, to help you with that planning effort. I don't know what the timing is for that.
Well, that's only for the intermodal transit. That's that's a piece of it. This is a lot bigger than that.
Right.
And I think what's different about, I don't know, I wasn't here obviously, but when, if we're going to, and it's been reflected in some of the comments from other board members in previous meetings, I see the intermodal transit center being linked to the discussion about zoning. Now, you all can correct me if I'm wrong, but and so I almost see that as a bit of a referendum on the transportation center, the zoning changes. That, to me, that really speaks to the amount of time that's necessary. Right. And it's not, you don't go in with the MOU the night of town meeting to do that personally. But that's just my personal view. Any other thoughts from anyone?
My recollection is that there were things sort of identified in the MOU, like things that we didn't know that could impact how the final plan was done, in terms of impacts and considerations given by the developer that have the potential to be worked in here. There's so many moving parts to this. Some things that come to my mind are who's doing the road improvements, who's going to have the ownership of the roads in the end. Maybe parameters beyond exactly what the planning board imposes for that zone in terms of housing units and what types of commercial activity is allowed. Parking, because the CDT completely eliminates parking requirements, and they've already suggested that they will be putting some of their own parking under any future buildings. So just those kinds of things are kind of a starting point for me. But I think that there are many things that hinge in terms of the transportation center on what we get back from Desmond. And we'd probably want some allowances that it could be smaller or larger. Maybe there might be something in there where we decide that we just want a flat parking lot, or we want some office space in this building for visitor services or something along those lines. We just want to leave some options open for identification. So those are my jumping off thoughts.
But I just, I'd be interested in feedback from others about the hypothesis that the zoning bylaw change discussion and the intermodal transit center will be linked by town meeting. Or am I?
Oh, I think 100%.
Okay.
For various reasons.
Okay. So we got to figure out that and be able to communicate that.
Yes. Yeah. If you support the zoning change, then you're going to have to be able to answer the questions at town meeting, which you're going to have to do with all the different aspects. It's going to be height. It's going to be impact on the water quality. It's going to be, people have come up to me on many issues already. And so I think there's a lot, you can't just go and say, well, let's just pretend that doesn't matter. You know, this is separate. It's completely separate. People go, no, it isn't.
I mean, I just reminded of the island home. We were very much further along with the island home at this point than we are with Harbor Place. And we thought we had all the answers, and we still didn't have enough time on all the answers. Now, we weren't going to change a lot of people's mind anyway, but I'm holding that in my mind as I'm thinking about it.
And you're going to get a 2/3 vote. Right. It's a high bar.
And I'm definitely feeling, I'm trying, based on the conversation at the last meeting, I'm trying to understand where the line is between zoning changes and talking about Harbor Place development and the parking garage. And I think that, you, Jim, and Don have been more involved in the work group. I'm definitely on the periphery of understanding exactly what's going on. I feel like right now that talking about MOUs, I can definitely come up with some things that I think would make sense, but I don't think I have a real concept of exactly what we're negotiating. So what are we agreeing to, or what are we even talking about? And so I'm just looking for clarification in terms of the zoning versus parking garage versus the Harbor Place development. Is when we're being asked to look at zoning changes, what are the implications for a parking garage? How are they separate? Are they totally separate? It feels like we're on developers' time frame, and it doesn't seem to me like we have the time at all to discuss it and flesh it out and look at the impacts. Maybe that's wrong, but that's what it feels like right now.
So in addition to the zoning, which obviously requires a town meeting vote, there are other elements, potential elements of this project that could require other town meeting votes. For example, if the town is going to actually construct a building or the parking garage, that obviously is going to need town meeting authorization. If there's any thought that perhaps the town would be acquiring any interest in real property or disposing of any interest in real property, of course, there are town meeting votes that would be involved there. So, I certainly wouldn't recommend we sit down and start negotiating an MOU unless there's an agreement, a common agreement about the approach. And that, to me, says there needs to be some serious conversations with the developer, and so that we can then decide, you all can then decide what's the best approach, what's the town's involvement going to be, and then you sit down and you start negotiating an MOU. And obviously you want the report back from Desmond before you do that. So I think getting this done before April is, I'll just say, pretty darn ambitious at this point.
Well, the Desmond report comes in May. Isn't that when that's coming?
I thought it was earlier.
Is it earlier? Do you know when?
I thought Desmond was more like in February or March.
That's what I thought.
When the Desmond report is due. When is it due?
That's what I thought.
Oh,
May.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Can we include things like some sort of requirement for energy efficiency or net zero or minimizing of construction waste or anything along those lines?
Certainly.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly.
Great.
So to your point about we need the Desmond report before town meeting, that we're not going to have it. So I'm just.
I think that we need to give some indication that the town likes this idea or not. We have to remember that this is not anything like a town project because we don't own the property. And we're being offered kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have a significant piece of downtown that could be used for public benefit. And right now, the zoning is RC. And they could decide tomorrow, after the tank farm moves and after they clean up the site and do all that, to do an approval not required subdivision plan for like 20 lots at least. And sell it. And it could be developed in anything that's allowed under RC zoning. So I think that I know we hate to feel rushed and we don't want to be on a developer's schedule, but we don't own this property. We've been offered an opportunity and we need to at least progress on it in some way in a timely manner. And, maybe they would be fine with us doing a fall special town meeting. I don't know if there's defined things that we've got to understand before we can move forward. But we need to get a sense of a more definitive sense from the community. So something kind of needs to go before town meeting.
And maybe it's a two-prong approach. Maybe we don't bring zoning in April, but we bring something else. I don't know what that would be. So, because I don't want it to fail.
Nor do I.
So,
I look at it and say we should at least understand what's possible. What's the maximum possible under R2? What's the maximum possible under commercial downtown? What's the difference between those two? What's the parking required maximum under one? What's the other? What's the benefit? And I could we use Richmond as an example. I don't think we ever figured out what on the back of an envelope, I figured out the benefit they were getting, and it was substantial. I still don't know how much benefit came back to the town. It was never quantified. We never knew. We've asked for it, haven't seen it.
And it failed. Richmond failed its first time.
Understood.
Right? it failed miserably.
Understood. But I'm just saying.
It changed significantly.
Yeah.
But the first time they came forward, it was a resounding no from town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lesson we should.
Well, but then with them there was the threats. It was partly a threat of if you don't do this, it's going to be the other.
I know, but they had to come back and change. I preferred that we get it right the first time.
That's sort of what I'm gathering, which means we have to understand our side of the equation in order to be intelligent and do it. And I don't think that we have that yet.
And we do have to do it the best we can, but we also have to recognize the other options that are available to private property owners. Yeah. And that was the same thing with Richmond, is they always had the option of going under the 40B. Mm-hmm. And those kind of things sound threatening, but it's just the reality of the different venues that are available to private property owners.
But I think they've been very forthright in their conversations with us that they want to be partners with us, and I know they have a history, at least of doing the right thing for the community, and I wouldn't think they wouldn't want to do that.
No, I think the way it's been approached from the beginning is that this is to maximize the benefit for Nantucket. Right. These people have many of the people involved have significant investment in Nantucket being a great place.
So I don't see the alternatives they have by right in zoning as a big, at least for me personally, a big concern.
And when you're talking about public benefit or the possibility of public benefit if the zoning's changed, is a parking garage the only public benefit that is being discussed, or are there other ways that we could work with them and there's a public benefit to the project?
Well, that's what the MOU is for. If we don't have an MOU, we don't have any agreement with them. They can just go do their own development under their current zoning or sell it or whatever. They would like the zoning change because then I would assume, so they can move along with some of their planning processes, and they can't fully define what buildings are going to look like unless they know what their ground cover is and what their height possibilities are. They also have a whole nother layer of harbor overlay in Chapter 91. Very many moving parts to this potential project.
Which they have to satisfy those along with this.
Yeah, so there's like parallel tracks, and knowing the zoning will be helpful to them in their development, also knowing what we want in an agreement. Mm-hmm. But the only way we're getting an agreement is if we move forward in some kind of a public-private partnership with them.
And that only will happen if there's a zoning change.
I don't know that, but that's what's been requested and recommended by the planning department, I believe, because the rest of downtown is under this zoning.
That was the other question I had. I thought RC was one of the zones that we were getting rid of.
It is.
And so if this just naturally changed without this development, what would it change into?
The recommendation.
The CDT.
Don, I like your approach. You said 5 to 10 minutes ago about giving some kind of indication that we're in for this partnership. But how do we not feel rushed? It feels rushed to me to try to get an MOU done by March 1st, which we wouldn't be able to even start until January with everything else we have going on. It seems rushed. So how do we do both of those? I know that's what you asked, but I'm agreeing in that approach.
So, if I may, so there's probably an interim step here that the board may want to consider prior to actually negotiating an MOU that would basically bind the town and the developer. It seems to me that you need to nail down as many of those moving parts as possible. So perhaps you want to look at a concept plan from the developer that gets down to exactly what it is they're looking for from the town. And if that is something that the board is comfortable with or thinks it's going in the right direction, you could adopt that concept plan subject to the successful negotiation of an MOU. And at that point, we could then really sit down and say, okay, here's what you need in terms of permitting, in terms of town meeting votes, and then actually plan a timeline as to when all that would take place.
And that would include zoning.
It would include zoning.
A bunch of other stuff, so.
Appropriation of money, transfer of land.
Yeah.
Again, because if you're going to start talking about land transfers, there's a real possibility you'd have to comply with the procurement laws. The town might have to issue an RFP, but we really can't. We really can't understand that unless there's some kind of a meeting of the minds about who's going to do what and what this project is generally going to look like. So that's maybe the way you want to try to
that's interesting. Yeah.
Approach this in a way that isn't too overwhelming at one point.
And what would we take to town meeting? A concept plan that would be,
well,
I mean, would we put for them to like a non-binding vote or something, or sense of the meeting, or
Jim, you could do that and have sort of a non-binding vote of town meeting approving a conceptual plan. So that gives you that would give you the community input. You could also do that yourself after holding community forums and getting community input. But anything the board adopts would, of course, have to be subject to, as I said, not only the various town meeting votes, but the successful negotiation of an MOU. But maybe there's something you could do initially at the April town meeting, as sort of as an initial vote of support. Whether that's the zoning, whether that's authorizing a land exchange, whether that's looking at a potential appropriation of money. It's really hard to say without having something on paper that you can get your arms around.
I think
it may be helpful to see their draft of what they were thinking of in terms of an MOU as a starting point. And then have something to respond to.
it's always, you can react. I like that concept of a concept plan. I mean, some intermediate step other than zoning right off the bat. And a way to get, because I think if we're going to have this intermodal transit center, it needs a lot of community input and conversation. So.
And this stuff, again, it needs to be quantified. You know, like there's a plan, and then there's what is the cost for a yearly basis to the town? What's the value of, like those things we have to be able to explain things to people in a way they can understand. And I think, so anyway, I just think it's really important, and I'd like to see it done. I like the plans that I've seen so far. But I also know that town meeting can be very difficult. It can go off on a tangent. If we're not all five of us in favor, in an agreement with the planning board, and if we can't answer the questions, all it'll take is one group really opposed for some reason, and we could be tripped up. So
So if we took a vote tonight of the members who are, if we say, we're going to put a motion on the table that approves the town, with taking the land and having a parking garage built, we don't know who's going to own it. I don't know. I don't think we get 5 votes tonight. So we have to really figure that out.
And I think, Jim, that's a little bit of where I still have a bit of confusion is that I feel like I'm by no means adverse to some sort of partnership that has public benefit. But it seems like that is being interpreted by saying yes to that. It's being interpreted as also an approval for a parking garage. And it would be one thing to say, do we want to develop an MOU that is going to consider zoning changes because their concept is this, and these are what we want to be seen? Can that be disconnected from, and there's going to be a parking garage, or are the two absolutely always related? And again, I think that right now I want to see more about the parking garage, and I want to see us looking at it in the context of the costs and also our own implementation of other parking mechanisms in town. So that's my concern and confusion, is that I could be supportive of a partnership, but not if it's considered a tacit approval of a parking garage. And that's why I'm still confused as to whether those are totally separate or whether one is inevitably connected to the other.
And we've always talked about this not as just a parking garage, but an entire intermodal transit center that would accommodate the buses, potential kiosks for bike rentals, places to pick up your ferry tickets. And like I said earlier, I mean, this could end up being where the NRTI offices are, where the visitor services offices are, freeing up the ability to completely redevelop the square where the town building is and give people their wish to keep town offices in town in a better facility. So, I mean, I have some visions of where all of this could go if we do it right. And it's not necessarily, I don't like the calling it a parking garage.
Or intermodal facility. Yeah. And I think, the way you've described it is clearly much better than a parking garage, intermodal facility. But I think as well, for me to be sold on an intermodal facility, it would be our major we have a parking issue, and we're trying to address our parking issue. Does that intermodal facility do that? Is it the logical next step based on the parking issues that we have? And can some of the things that you mentioned be accommodated without a full-blown, 250 space? That would be the parking element of an intermodal facility.
Right.
And I know for me, 100%, if we are going down that route, if there's support for this intermodal facility, then I think that from the very start, the some sort of design for an obsolescence, if we do get to that point that they're predicting, where we don't need 250 parking spaces.
That was one of the things that we asked Desmond to discuss.
In other words, the floors would be flat rather than ramped, so they could turn into something else.
Yeah, and those are the kind of things, and that's where, again, I think you have a lot more information than I do.
I think they've talked about that, but again, it was several months ago when they made their presentation. So,
and it didn't feel as if it was an absolute. It felt like it was in discussion. But to me, those would be the things that would be important if that's the route we go.
Jim and I have had the benefit of being on the work group, so we've just heard the information a few times.
But that would be a good thing to put in the MOU.
Yes.
I mean, that's an expectation that it would be whatever, reusable and could accommodate future redevelopment. And but all the things that Dawn talked about, that's part of the package that we would present, I think, when we do zoning that sells the intermodal transit center. Because I do think they're interchangeably linked, and that's, I think, Rita's question is, are they? And I think they are in terms of the eyes of the community.
Well, that's what happened up in Bar Harbor. They had a parking garage in the, and it was a very close vote. But and they were going to do paid parking. The paid parking went down. The parking garage didn't get voted because the people thought it was benefiting the ocean something in, or because they needed some of the land there to do the whole garage. So people were like, why are we building a garage that they're going to have half of? And it was like, well, they're going to have part of it, but it's their land. But people, so people get onto something very easily, and you have to make sure that you can really describe why you're doing what you're doing.
I think, oh, go ahead, Jason.
So can we go into this thinking of the MOU of the public benefit of a transit center and with different options? Some of those, it could be like what you said, might just be flat parking, could be a parking garage type system, but the transit center with public benefit that's kind of part of it, but not maybe connecting it 100% to that. Am I not?
Well, I think
thinking that
there's
right?
even, yes, in terms of understanding exactly what I'm approving or not approving, understanding if one exists without the other. But I think as well that even in terms of if there was something that we were really trying to get to town meeting by April, I think it would be possible that people could approve some sort of, partnership that supports the development. But if the parking garage gets shut down, or the intermodal facility gets shut down, and maybe it would be different a year later, but what happens then? Do we then go back to a situation where they just develop the way they're going to develop? How do we lose, if it's not an intermodal facility, do we lose any possibility of public benefit? And to me, that also would sort of reveal how interconnected the two are.
That's a good question. Does the transit center have to have the parking garage? Like, what are the options with the transit center?
It does. I think it does.
I don't know, having the buses there. I mean, there's more to it. I don't know.
Well, does it have to from the people who would be granting us the land? From their perspective, are they counting on us to put in the
Right.
parking? That's, I think, a discussion point for the MOU. What if we go an entirely different direction with parking, and who knows what will happen over the next number of years?
Well, I've always labored under the belief that they give us the land and somehow a parking garage gets built or an intermodal transit center gets built. I don't
you
see.
you can't have a supermarket down there with nowhere to park.
Right. So
You know,
I think,
it would defeat the purpose. Why would you do it?
So we're going to have, I think it's contingent on there being a multi-level storage facility for cars.
I mean, I would assume that parking will be a big component of it, but
Yeah, and just like we should have some things that we desire, they're going to have things that they're going to need, for this to work. It has to work both ways. You can't run a supermarket without parking. You can't take away 120 spaces, 160 spaces and put 0. You can't build out the rest of the property and not add parking to it in some manner. So I just think that we have to be realistic that, we have to do the things, they're going to have to things that they're going to desire, in which makes sense for us too. But we have to, it's not like, here, just have that.
That's helpful, because you guys have been in these discussions for a while, and I'm kind of playing catch up, trying to think how to approach a MOU, how to show that we want to do a partnership, but it feels rushed to me. I don't want to be signing something the night of annual town meeting. Not that it would happen. I'm trying to find the middle ground. And you gave one example of an intermittent way of doing it.
I think we started talking about the structure of an MOU, but I think it's really broadened, I think appropriately, into some kind of what are we trying to accomplish here with this whole project. And I think the developers, again, are smart people. They have the interest of the island in mind, and they wouldn't want to bring it forward unless it was going to be successful. I know that for a fact. So this has all been great input, I think, for our conversation when we meet with them.
Yeah, so
That's
we're
why
meeting next week.
I really wanted it to be here.
And John will be on the phone for at least part of the
Yeah.
meeting. So I guess we can report back after next week.
But I think, they will have seen this or heard reports about this, and maybe they, as observers, they can synthesize what they see the issues are among us and what questions they may need to have answered as a result of these conversations. So,
And if you get a plan, we can assess and we can assess that, or we can, put numbers to that. I mean, that's part of it. So many square feet equals so much, so many spaces. What's the value? We can appraise it one
and
way
to
or
me,
the
it's
other.
more of a concept plan rather than I'd rather not have a document right now, personally.
Well, but you need a concept plan is a plan. A concept plan is how many approximately how
No,
many
I'd rather
square
not,
feet?
it's not an MOU. I think I would.
You want to be at the first step before the MOU
Yeah,
right
yeah,
now. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, yeah.
But
I'm
is there
agreeing.
a certain element of, maybe not a full MOU, but some sort of in the concept plan, an idea of what are, in a way, their main priorities are non-negotiables, as in there has to be an expectations from us without it being a full-on MOU.
So I was just jotting down some notes. It seems to me the order here would be to have discussions with the developer to develop a concept plan that would include, as sort of one of the essential elements, how this public-private partnership would look like, and bring that back to the Board of Selectmen for adoption, is subject to obviously negotiating the details. And then after that, we can sit down and develop a timeline for permitting and town meeting votes, and see what makes sense in terms of in what order do you do that, and how long of a period of time can you get it done in April? Do you have to call a special town meeting in the fall? But we would really need to develop that once we have a document to work with, and then you negotiate the MOU. So that would be my suggestion.
I like that.
Okay.
That sounds good.
All right. We'll reconvene on this after we have the work group meeting.
Yeah, it might be just to give a report.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
we could. Yep. Because we're meeting Tuesday.
Right.
Yep. So there won't be anything in the packet, but
You'll have it all figured out by Wednesday.
Well, I think it was a great discussion.
we'll have something to tell you.
And thank you, Tim, for bringing it.
Do you want to hear from Marcy?
Okay, and now we're going to go over the citizens articles.
Yes, and I know it's getting late,
Quickly.
so I'll try to make this as fast as possible. So there are 26 citizens articles. There are a number of them that I would call relatively, we've certainly seen them before. They're somewhat routine. There are additions to the sewer district. There are zoning amendments, changes to the zoning map. There are some yard sale-like transactions, acquiring property and then disposing of. I'm not going to go through those in any detail. They're in my chart, but unless you have any questions, I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on them. Petition number B is a non-binding referendum to ban the use of all herbicides and pesticides containing glyphosate. This is non-binding. In order for it to be binding, it would have to be a bylaw, but the Attorney General would not likely approve such a bylaw because of preemption issues under state law. So I just wanted to point that out. Petition C is a proposal to amend the charter to change the name of the Board of Selectmen, and it would be the Select Board. Now, there are a couple of ways you could go about this. I had suggested one way, which was to just make a very simple change to the section of the charter that deals with the Board of Selectmen, and just add a sentence that for purposes of the charter, the Board of Selectmen shall be hereinafter referred to as the Select Board. Because it's important, under the general laws, certain boards of selectmen have authority. You won't see the reference to Select Board. So I thought that was the cleanest and the best way to do this. The petition that actually came in would amend the charter by substituting every place where Board of Selectmen appears, the Select Board. And you can certainly go that approach, but the general court will not pass it in that form. They're going to want to see every single reference to a Board of Selectmen and what that is changing to. So it's something to think about. My understanding was the petitioner didn't like my approach. They really just want to change the name. So that's something that will be a further discussion.
I'll make a quick comment. I mean, I'm not against changing the name, but has anyone ever had to switch over just a single bank account or a single credit card, and you realize what a pain it is?
Yeah.
You have to think about that through the whole government. And, we have trouble getting, the day-to-day stuff now, no offense, Libby. I can't imagine them spending 2 months trying to change every document properly and in timely manner. It seems like a simple, easy thing, and it isn't. So
Well, my recommended change is simple and easy.
yours is simple, and I like yours.
Okay,
I might amend it. Maybe select head, and you could be the head.
So number I is another non-binding vote to oppose offshore seismic testing and offshore oil and gas development. Number L is a potentially very significant change, and I wish I could tell you what it means, but I really can't. It would create the Nantucket Special Counsel, which would provide a judgment for anyone seeking relief from ongoing disputes that have met an impasse with the town of Nantucket. So if this were to pass town meeting, there would have to be much, much more detail. What decisions of what boards. You can think about your Historic District Commission Act that has a role for the Board of Selectmen, an administrative appeal before something goes to court. I suppose you could do something similar to that for other boards, but it would be a very complicated process. There could be a lot of laws of unintended consequence, and frankly, I think it's probably something you should approach warily.
And where does the board come from? Are they elected?
It doesn't say.
Are they appointed by the Board
Right.
of Selectmen who are now at an impasse with this person?
Yeah, I would think it would have to be an elected board. Otherwise, I don't know. I just think it would be, unless the Board of Selectmen want to become this super board and just expand the role beyond the HDC to include, because I don't know what it means to reach an impasse with the town.
What's the impetus for this?
I don't know.
I
Don't you
think
know?
I think I know.
I think I'm guessing I do.
You're right.
Okay.
Mr.
How many
Joe,
bites of the apple do we want? Okay.
I get a question too. What relief is it?
I'm sorry?
What relief would be provided? I mean, they can't really authorize money. Where'd the money come from?
Presumably, they could overturn a decision of another town board.
But
Just-
what if it has to do with money?
Well, I don't know what the intent, I don't know how well thought out this is.
We're shooting the messenger here, so.
You're shooting me?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we don't mean to.
No, I understand. Number N is to waive the sewer privilege fee for year-round residents who are required to connect to Shimo. That's really reserved to the sewer commissioners, and I don't think you can waive fees for just residents as opposed to non-residents, at least not without special legislation. So this one is not ready for prime time. It's certainly not in the correct legal form. Q is discontinue the Tacoma Green project. And this is not approved as to form. Town meeting doesn't have the authority to discontinue development plans. I mean, town meeting voted to authorize the disposition of this property. The selectmen issued an RFP. You awarded the disposition to Hal Keen, and to try to undo that now really can't be done because rights have vested in the award of the contract and the execution of the documents. And at least you couldn't do it without incurring significant liability to the town. To the extent the article attempts to direct the planning board, or rather regulatory board, to not issue a permit or to act in a particular matter, that would be way beyond the authority of town meeting and could also result in legal liability. So I would certainly not recommend consideration of that article. R is to impose a 7-year moratorium on the use of public resources for the purpose of new construction of housing. Again, at most, this would be a non-binding sense of the meeting motion or vote. You can't bind a future town meeting. If town meeting decides to authorize the disposition of town property in the future for a particular project, this vote would have no impact on the subsequent action of a town meeting. So it's, as I said, it's non-binding at best.
Quick comment. Looking at, so when we get to the point of what goes on the town meeting, where does it go? One of the things we have to think about is, what is the crowd at town meeting? What are they going to be thinking about? And I think some of this is not trusting the town. And I think there's going to be a bit of, we don't trust the town. What are you doing to us at this town meeting if these gain momentum? So, which makes the Harbor Place thing even more important to realize we're going to have a good number of people there mad at us or mad at the planning board. And so I think we have to be careful, how we, what we bring forward and how we present it.
And of course, the order of the articles is up to the selectmen.
The order, but just the realization that this is what we're going to be facing.
Right.
It's not.
I'm just really struggling with this article because I don't know if this was the full intent, but I'm glad it's non-binding, but if it wasn't, this would essentially cut out any affordable housing initiatives that we've been doing. It would allow any private development to continue,
right?
But it would cut out anything we've done with land we grant to Habitat, with housing land we grant to Housing Nantucket. It would basically say, we don't need a housing specialist anymore because we're not doing anything to fix our housing problem that's quite significant.
Yes.
So I just needed to say that.
It's it abrogates the our hard work and 2 town meeting votes to develop a housing bank and get that through the state legislature and all the work that's been done there. It it's against the $1 million we've been funding for to in fact, and if anything, we've been saying we want more housing stock from that money. So it's
So the last one that I wanted to comment on was letter S, which Mr. Dickler went big and bold here. Let me just say that. It would authorize the selectmen to place a $30 million tax levy override on the ballot. Now, the first thing we all have to understand is there's only one entity that can place a Proposition 2.5 ballot question on the ballot, and that's the Board of Selectmen. So you don't need anyone's authorization to do it, and no one can order you to do it. That is in your sole and absolute discretion. If you were to put this on the ballot, and if it were to pass, you have to spend the override money in the first year that it's voted. Now, that sounds like maybe an impossibility, but the way DOR looks at this is your override dollars are the first dollars that are spent. So if you have a $94 million budget, whatever your operating budget is, obviously it's going to be way more than $30 million. So you could just put this on. You could keep your budget exactly the way it is that you're going to propose. You could have this override, and that would give you a $30 million increase in your levy limit, which would be permanent. So that is possible. If you wanted to take advantage of that this year and actually appropriate more than you normally would, you would make it contingent on the passage of this override. And if the override passes, then you can spend it immediately. If it doesn't pass, well, that supplemental appropriation would go away.
Unless you do an underride. And there is such a thing.
There is such a thing.
And it's been used like once or twice in the state.
Yeah.
For only once or twice ever.
Yeah, they were fairly popular when Prop 2.5 was first enacted.
Yeah.
But yes, you could always do an underwrite. That's correct. But and also this direction to the board about how to set the tax classifications and the tax rate. Again, under state law, that's your prerogative and your sole discretion. Any questions?
Thank you.
And just to remind you, FinCom is having a public hearing on all of these tomorrow.
Committee reports.
I went to the WPI and saw a couple of the proposals the other day, and it was very interesting. And I was particularly interested in the transportation stuff, and a couple key points. One of the things is everyone wants just pay a one-time fee. They did the what do you call it when you ask the questions? Questionnaire.
Survey.
Yeah, thank you. Survey, and everyone wants a one-time fee and to be able to do what they do now.
Some of us were quoted as being against it.
I understand.
That were in that was in the report.
I know. So that was one. The other one is everyone favors satellite parking lots. Except the question is, well, where are they and how do we buy them and how do we put the cars and who's really going to use them? Isn't sort of been answered. And then they actually did. They were complimentary of the selectmen for talking about demand management and parking issues, and they see those tied to a parking lot. So those are the three takeaways I took, and these kids did a pretty good job. They did a lot of work.
They did.
Yeah, and they didn't really. I don't think their half hour really reflected how much work they put in. When you listen to some of them, and then people ask questions, they had a lot more answers underneath, but they did a good job.
Anything else?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
You just have the one sign.
Didn't even recognize it. Not a pile.